I hope you have enjoyed coming here and taking a look at the new GAB, and I certainly hope that this will not be the last time. If this is the first time that you are visiting us, please know that the doors are open to the public, and your engagement and your involvement in the work of legislation and development of policy is always critically important. You are a very important voice in the work that we do, so welcome, and I'm glad that you're here today for this important meeting. Before we begin, I would like to ask the members of the Senate Education and Health Committee to introduce themselves by sharing their name and the district that they represent, and we will start to my far right with Senator Pekarsky.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Stella Pekarsky. I represent the 36th district, which is Western Fairfax County in North Virginia. Nova.
Good afternoon, Skylar Van Valkenburg, Senator of the 16th District, which is all Western Henrico.
Good afternoon. I'm LaSharice Aird. I represent Senate District 13, which includes most of Eastern Henrico, and then we swing to Charles City County, Sussex County, Surrey County, Dinwiddie County, Prince George County, the city of Petersburg, and the city of Hopewell.
Good afternoon. I'm State Senator Jennifer Boysko, representing the 38th District, and that is Northern Fairfax County.
Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Favola, and I represent the 40th Senate District, and that is contained completely within Arlington County.
And good afternoon again. I'm Ghazala Hashmi, representing the 15th Senatorial District, which is parts of the city of Richmond, as well as Chesterfield County.
I am Mark Peake. I represent Senate District 8, which includes all of the city of Lynchburg, all of Bedford County, and all of Campbell County.
There we go. Good afternoon. My name is Tara Durant. I represent the 27th District, which includes most of the county of Stafford, all of the city of Fredericksburg, and portions of Spotsylvania County. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Senator Christine Craig, representing District 19, which is parts of Chesapeake and the city of Virginia Beach.
Thank you. And Senator Bagby has joined us. If you could do a brief introduction.
Senator Lamont Bagby, representing the 14th District, meaning most of you in the audience.
All right. Thank you, Senator Bagby, and thank you to my colleagues for the introductions. I just want to spell out a few items briefly as we get started and want to share a little bit first about the goals of this meeting. As you have seen in some of the communications that have been distributed, this is a fact-finding mission meeting. It's an opportunity for us to learn directly from those who are involved in student-led actions, eyewitnesses, and our institutional representatives about any actions that occurred, the decisions that were made, when they were made, the policies that the institutions have in place regarding public demonstrations, academic freedom, and free speech. Last spring, we had a great deal of media coverage regarding events at various Virginia institutions, and my office, and I'm sure that other offices, began hearing immediately from constituents and others that the full story was not being told. Institutional representatives provided varying perspectives. Individuals directly involved and eyewitnesses to campus demonstrations also shared their insights, and members of our campus organizations, concerned parents and students, also reached out to describe their unique experiences. So last May, Senator Aird and I held a press conference announcing that we would organize this meeting. Our colleague and the chair of the Higher Education Subcommittee, Senator Mamie Locke, was not able to join us at that press conference because of scheduling conflicts, and she will be arriving to this meeting a little later because she's chairing another committee right now. As a former professor, I deeply value the role that civic discussion and engagement plays in our college classrooms and on our campuses. Our college communities represent one of the last spaces that we have for dialogue, discussion, debate of complex and serious materials. And I hope that we can hold on to those important features that help to define the role and the purpose of higher learning. At the same time, I also appreciate our absolute commitment to public safety, to ensuring that all within the community feel welcome, safe, and included, and that we preserve the values of mutual respect even as we grapple with difficult issues. Receiving the written testimony of so many of you and others who couldn't be here today has been incredibly helpful. I want to thank each of you who have shared in a public way your experiences and your insights. I know that such sharing is not easy. It can be re-traumatizing. I greatly appreciate all the parents and students, the faculty and staff, the community members, organizations, and faith leaders who have shared their experiences and their unique perspectives. Thank you also to our institutional representatives who are here today to share their thoughts and insights on some of the questions that have been raised. Each of your comments will help us. The goals include helping us as legislators to define necessary next steps as we work to protect members of our college communities and to support those critical cornerstones of academic debate and dialogue. On a more personal level and beyond policy, I am hopeful that we will each listen to each other and learn from experiences and perspectives that may not reflect our own, and that we build towards community rather than division. So with regard to the flow of the program today, we're going to hear first from our institutional representatives and also one organization that has worked closely with Virginia institutions. Our institutional representatives will speak for about 5 to 6 minutes, and I've asked them to address these specific questions: the institutional responses to the demonstrations, the involvement of law enforcement agencies and campus police, the institutional policies on public demonstrations and free speech, and the development and modifications to these policies, including a timeline for such modifications. Following that, we will also hear from individual and organizational representatives as they provide their testimonies. So the expectations for our speakers today, given the large number of individual speakers that we have beyond our institutional representatives, we have close to 30 individual speakers who have signed up for both in-person and online comments. We will be limiting those comments to 2 minutes each, given the large number of individual speakers that we have. The mic will be shut off at the 2-minute mark, so please be concise. I ask that you speak directly to your own experiences and not attempt to engage in foreign policy matters. International policy is beyond the scope of the Virginia State Assembly, and it's certainly beyond the scope of this committee. The context of this meeting have been defined, and I expect all speakers to adhere to these contexts. We will first hear our in-person presenters and then our online presenters. Online presenters are asked to turn on their video when they provide their testimony, and speakers will be called in the order in which my office received request. There are also expectations of the audience members here today, and I'm sure we will all abide by them. Members of the audience, in line with the rules of the Virginia Senate and the expected protocols of our General Assembly committee meetings, I ask that you refrain from audible responses to speakers. Neither clapping nor heckling is permitted, and I'm sure we will all follow the rules of decorum that are defined by the Senate. I ask that we all listen to each other with respect and with that proper decorum. Individuals who do not help us to maintain this level of expected respect will be escorted from the committee room, and I'm sure we will not have to do that this afternoon. For my committee members up here, I want to draw your attention, and you received this electronically as well, and that is a wonderful summary that has been provided by Julia, our DLS attorney here today. It is a guide to relevant code sections that are connected to issues of freedom of speech on college campuses, student and faculty expression, demonstration rights as well as limits. And these are going to help us to identify any necessary next steps that we may need to take beyond this meeting. But I hope you'll become familiar with what is already in existence in our Virginia Code. And if you have any questions regarding what is in the code, Julia is here to help us and guide us. Committee members, I also ask you to listen carefully and consider the questions that you would like to have answered. Given the complexity of the questions that we will have, we will not ask our institutional representatives nor organizations to respond today. Rather, I ask our committee members to share their questions with us. We will compile them, direct them to identified institutions and/or organizations, and then share those responses publicly. Committee members will likely want to keep considering questions after we adjourn, and I welcome your staff to direct those questions to my office so that we can work on achieving answers. So as a reminder, we will not be asking questions directly of any representatives who is here to speak today because we are seeking to expand our own knowledge and our own understanding about complex concerns and situations. We need a full context that cannot be achieved in an abbreviated time. And in that regard, again, I want to thank all of those individuals and organizations that have submitted written testimony. That is the fuller context that is necessary for us to achieve a nuanced understanding. Those written testimonies have been shared by our committee members, and I hope everyone has had an opportunity to read and review them. We are still receiving more written testimony, and we will continue to share those as they come in. So thank you to everyone who is helping us to understand multiple perspectives and the issues in a more nuanced manner than we are typically able to achieve in 60-second sound bites. So with that, I will like to begin with our institutional representative.
Madam Chair?
We've been waiting. My speaker on.
Oh.
Senator Craig,
Yes,
please go ahead.
Thank you. So each university will be up here and they will be given 6 minutes to address the committee, and we're not allowed to ask one single question. Have we done this before in our full committee meetings? I'm not sure. But I think it's going to be very hard if we have a question while they're speaking to ask it then rather than have to wait and text it or email it.
Thank you.
I think everybody here in this meeting should have a right to ask a question.
Thank you, Senator Craig, for that question. You may articulate your question, you may direct it to me, and we will keep a running list, and we will give our representatives the time to develop a full answer, because many of the questions that we have are complex questions, and so giving them the time to develop a written response is going to be an appropriate next procedure for us, because we are compiling the research that we need in order to take next action.
Madam Chair, further question.
Thank you, Senator Craig. Please go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you so much, and thank you for chairing this meeting. But out of respect, we have complex meetings all the time during the General Assembly. We have 45 days to do our business, 60 days to do our business during session, and they're complex issues. And so we've always been able to address the person, organization at that point to ask a pertinent question right then so we can get the answer. Very disappointed that we are being gagged.
Thank you, Senator Craig. Your disappointment is noted. And again, please, you may direct your questions to the chair, and we will compile those questions and then distribute them to receive appropriate answers. Senator Durant?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for chairing the committee. I am also going to reiterate that we must be able to answer questions, ask questions, and they must be directed in person here. We have never not been able to do that. That is not a policy that we've ever adhered to, and we have come down today from great distances. We must be able to answer these complex questions and get the answers. I fully respect also be able to submit written questions as follow-up, but we must be able to ask and have them answered here.
Thank you. Senator, your issue has been noted. Because of the time limits and the number of issues that we have to go through, I will be asking you to state your question. We will be compiling them and then giving opportunity to the institutions to develop their comprehensive response.
Madam Chair, a follow-up, please.
Senator Durant.
Yeah, I believe fully that I intend to ask these questions directly. It cannot be a follow-up in writing afterwards. It must happen here.
Thank you, Senator Durant. That is at the discretion of the chair. Senator Peake.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Question to the chair. When were these institutional representatives notified and organized or set to testify today?
Senator Peake, in response to your question, after we had announced that we were going to hold this committee, this was last May, I've had conversations over the past several months with individual members of the institutions, primarily the government relations individuals, and also some of the college presidents.
Had they been arranged to testify today? When were they scheduled to testify? I was told that they were not scheduled, had not been contacted to testify today as of last week.
I had verbally communicated to the institutions that we would be having this committee meeting in mid-September.
And Madam Chair, my question is, had anyone from this committee specifically contacted any representative from these individuals and lined up these individuals to testify today? And if so, when was that done?
My office reached out to all of the institutions that are presenting today, and we reached out at the same time that the agenda was shared publicly.
Madam Chair, further question.
Senator Peake.
Yeah. Were any of the law enforcement agencies contacted and scheduled to testify here today?
Thank you for your question, Senator Peake. This was left up to the discretion of the institutions about which representatives they wanted to bring, whether it was campus police or representatives from their student affairs divisions or any deans, and the institutions selected which representatives they wanted to bring to us today.
Yes, Madam Chair, further question.
Senator Peake.
Were any Jewish organizations, student groups, members of those organizations contacted and scheduled to testify today?
Thank you, Senator Peake, for your question. We didn't contact any organizations, period. Organizations and individuals who had heard about the Senate committee hearing back in May had been reaching out throughout the summer, asking when we were going to schedule these meetings. When the meeting was scheduled and publicly shared, that's when individuals reached out and asked to speak. We have a number of faith leaders from campus Jewish organizations here. We have rabbis from our synagogues. We have the Anti-Defamation League. We have quite a few representatives from Jewish organizations who are here and as well have shared written testimony with us as well.
Thank you.
Senator Durant, do you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. There are, it's my understanding, 30 individual speakers that are lined up in person and online. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can you tell me how are there were, I assume, more. I know that there were others that have been denied. How are those that were selected, the 30 that are here in person and lined up, how are they chosen to speak?
There was no selection process through my office. It was the individuals who reached out and asked to speak. First come, we just put them in the order, and we cut off at midnight last night. So anyone who reached out past that time period has been offered to provide written testimony, as many others have already done, and we continue to disseminate that written testimony. But there was no call to any specific people. As individuals reached out, we continue to add them to our growing spreadsheet of those who wish to speak, and anyone who was involved on campuses, family members. We have a lot of parents whose children are at these institutions who submitted written testimony, as well as will be speaking today. So we did not distinguish or differentiate. No one was denied.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up question. Is it, to your knowledge, do we have parity in terms of any those who are on either side of some of the campus protests that are a balance, I guess is what I'm asking, in representation today?
Senator, to answer your question, we have a diverse group of individuals. These are not just students, they're also parents. We also have faculty and staff. And yes, we have perspectives from all sides. I would argue that it's not an either-or situation, not a black and white situation. There are a complex number of different perspectives, and we have a wide range of those perspectives. We certainly welcome the opportunity to hear what individuals have experienced. And as you've seen from the written testimony, we have received written testimony from a significantly large number of individuals with varying perspectives about what they experienced on college campuses and their concerns.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Craig.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know you had stated that the institutions were able to bring who they wanted, but we also have what we call a mutual aid agreement with VSP and other law enforcement organizations, and almost on every protest, there were that mutual aid agreement was extended to VSP and other local agencies. Were those law enforcement agencies invited to this meeting?
Thank you, Senator Craig. We asked our institutions to decide who they wanted to bring to us, and they will be sharing their individual responses. And again, the purpose of this committee is to initiate fact-finding. And should we feel the need to bring more individuals and have further conversations, we certainly have the opportunity to do that based on what we hear today.
Follow-up.
Senator Craig.
Thank you. I agree. I think fact-finding is 100% a good thing, but fact-finding only works when you have all the facts and all the findings, and you have everybody, all the key players at one sitting, not just one set, and then we have several different meetings. Again, the mutual aid agreement was not with campus police; it was individual law enforcement agencies. So, of course, the universities were not going to bring Virginia State Police or other local jurisdictions. They would come on their own because they participated in the college and university protests under the mutual aid agreement. So I'm very disappointed that they were not at least extended a welcome here.
Thank you, Senator Craig. All right, seeing no further questions or comments, let us go ahead and begin. We will hear first from our online representatives, and we have an individual who has a shorter window of time to join us, so I would ask Dr. Frances Keene to be welcomed online. Is she in the waiting room?
Hello, good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Keene. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you for your time. My name is Frances Keene, and I serve Virginia Tech as Vice President for Student Affairs. Thank you to you and all members of the committee for the opportunity to join you all and speak with you today by Zoom. As a way to begin, I'd like to affirm that Virginia Tech strongly supports free speech, even when the content of that speech may be disagreeable to some. However, those rights do not extend beyond the point where they interfere with the rights of others, violate our policies, the Code of Virginia, federal law, or create a threat to the health and safety of others. In my role as Vice President for Student Affairs and with many colleagues on campus at Virginia Tech, collectively we seek to support our students and listen to their concerns. In addition, we are deeply committed to our students' academic success, their health and well-being, and providing experiences that prepare them for success in their lives beyond Virginia Tech. In today's divided global landscape, Virginia Tech seeks to be part of the solution by giving our students the skills they need to navigate the world and make it a better place. University policy changes and refinement are a continual process, and when we review our policies and procedures, we're ensuring that they align with campus and community needs. Circumstances in the world and our own community necessitate that ongoing review. And we're committed to that review process again because we're committed to student success. Virginia Tech began its efforts to update our facility usage policy, which we refer to as Policy 5000, in 2023. The events of the spring 2024 further accentuated the need to update and clarify various aspects of our policies. And in the summer of 2024, a cross-campus working group developed a revised policy. The revisions to our Policy 5000 included the following: expanding the scope of the uses of select facilities to all university real property. That includes our buildings, our grounds, and our infrastructure. Clarifying what constitutes a violation of university business. Explicitly stating that a sponsoring entity is responsible for any damages caused at an event. Explicitly prohibiting scheduled overnight events between midnight and 6 a.m. Clarifying that individuals wearing masks must present a legally sufficient form of personal identification when requested by an agent of the university, consistent with the Code of Virginia. Adding language that no person can unlawfully obstruct or disrupt the speaker of any event. Adding language explicitly prohibiting camping and clarifying the use of tents for other purposes. And clarifying that noncompliance with university policy may constitute trespass under Virginia state law, leading to disciplinary action and/or arrest. These policy changes reflect guidance received from the Commonwealth as well as best practices from peer institutions. Since the start of the academic year, we've engaged with our student, faculty, and staff leaders to clearly communicate our commitment to providing a safe and inclusive campus that preserves the rights of all, while making it clear to event sponsors and participants that they have distinct responsibilities to the university, their peers, and the broader community. Those familiar with Virginia Tech understand that ut prosim, that I may serve, is more than an institutional motto. Rather, it defines who we are and how we engage with all members of our community. Our goal is that free speech should be exercised in a manner that ensures a learning environment that supports and promotes civil debate, constructive dialogue, and mutual respect across differences. Madam Chair, distinguished members of the committee, thank you so much for your time to speak with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Keene. Our next speaker is also online, and this is Scott Ballinger, who is Director of the Appellate Litigation Clinic and Special Advisor to the Provost on Free Expression and Inquiry at the University of Virginia.
Thank you very much. My name is Scott Ballinger, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Because of pending litigation and investigations the university is currently facing, I've been advised that it wouldn't be appropriate at this time to talk about the specific events of last spring, but I would be delighted to talk about UVA's policies surrounding free speech and demonstrations generally, and the revisions that we have made to those policies this summer. The University of Virginia's current governing statement on free expression was adopted by our Board of Visitors in June 2021. It unequivocally affirms the university's commitment to the principle that all views, beliefs, and perspectives deserve to be articulated and heard free from interference. The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education ranks the speech policies and climates of over 250 universities nationwide to identify those that have the most open environments for free speech. The University of Virginia is currently number one in the entire country in those rankings. Of course, the university also recognizes that principles of free expression have important limits, including the need for content-neutral regulation of the time, place, and manner of speech, so that the free expression of ideas by some does not interfere with the rights of others. Like dozens of other universities across the country, the university engaged in a careful review of its policies this past summer, considering the experiences and lessons learned from the prior year, not just at UVA, but nationwide. In broad strokes, the changes this summer clarified that indoor demonstrations must be silent, must not obstruct access or disrupt teaching and learning. Student groups and persons affiliated with the university may use most outdoor university property for speaking or expression between 6 a.m. and 2 a.m., so long as they do not impede normal university operations, obstruct traffic, restrict equal access to the outdoor spaces, or violate policies or laws. Camping with tents or sleeping bags and any sleeping outside between midnight and 6 a.m. are prohibited. Tents for purposes other than camping require a permit, are permissible only in certain areas, and cannot be left up overnight. And consistent with Virginia law, persons who are masked in order to conceal their identity may be asked by authorized university officials to present identification in order to verify their identities, subject to certain exceptions. The specific prohibitions against camping, sleeping outdoors, and demonstrations between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. are consistent with similar rules or clarifications adopted this summer by many other institutions across the country. All of them make clear in various ways that extended encampments on university property are not permitted. There are several reasons why we, like many if not most peer institutions, believe that encampments are not an appropriate form of protest in a university environment. One is that the University of Virginia is a United Nations World Heritage Site, not a campground. 40 years ago, in a case called Clark versus Community for Creative Nonviolence, the Supreme Court held that the Park Service could prohibit camping and sleeping outside on the National Mall, even when done for expressive purposes as part of a protest to raise awareness about homelessness. The Supreme Court emphasized the government's substantial interest in maintaining these parks in an attractive and intact condition, readily available to the millions of people who wish to see and enjoy them. The same is true of the historic grounds of the University of Virginia, which attract visitors from all over the world and inspire and delight all of us who live, work, and study here. Perhaps more importantly, though, in our view, the whole idea of an encampment or an occupation of public property is contrary to First Amendment values and the values of an academic institution. The whole point of time, place, and manner rules is to ensure that public spaces remain reasonably available for speech by everyone. And the most important command of the First Amendment, viewpoint neutrality, forbids any favoritism toward any one side of a debate in the use of these spaces. For all of these reasons, it is critically important that groups wishing to protest on public property take turns. But in its very nature, an encampment or occupation attempts to claim physical space exclusively for one side of an argument. If that happens more than temporarily, it risks depriving other people of their own equal right to expression and also risks sending an unintended message that the university itself is choosing sides. We also know from experience now that across the country, many of these encampments effectively set up barricades and litmus tests and only allowed students and community members who agreed with the encampment's position to pass through. The federal courts held that those exclusions denied some students full access to every part of their campuses in violation of federal non-discrimination law. Those practices also became a flashpoint for alarming violence. We believe that even when encampments or occupations are well-intended, the risks of exclusion and conflict are just too great. And finally, we are a public institution with limited resources and an obligation to shepherd them wisely. Making sure that an overnight encampment remains compliant with our policies and safe, both for the students involved and for others, basically demands 24-hour police supervision day after day, which is unreasonable to ask of our university police who have their own lives and families, and also diverts security resources away from other important priorities. The university's statement on protest demonstrations and gatherings is available at freespeech.virginia.edu. It also explains how all of these policies are enforced. The university always prefers to resolve conflict at the lowest level possible. The first and preferred option always is that a university official who sees a violation will tell the person that they are violating policy and ask them to stop. That is almost always the end of it. If the behavior nonetheless continues, university officials will ask for identification to enable disciplinary follow-up. Failure to provide identification and comply could result in an interim suspension and a trespass warning from law enforcement, and if noncompliance persists, ultimately arrest. In cases of disciplinary referrals for first-time and low-level violations of policy, the university's long-standing practice is to offer the students involved the option of informal resolution between the student and student affairs personnel. More serious and recurring matters are generally adjudicated by the student-run University Judiciary Committee, which has discretion over the appropriate resolution. The university remains committed to freedom of expression within the broadest limits possible, consistent with an equal respect for the rights of others. Thank you very much.
Thank you for providing that testimony and those perspectives, and I'm sure we will have questions that will be shared with you as well as the other speaker after this meeting. Here today, I will go ahead in the order that I have names listed, and our first individual is Dr. Aaron Hart, Vice President of Student Affairs from Virginia Commonwealth University. Welcome, Dr. Hart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. VCU supports freedom of speech and peaceful protest within the framework of our policies. What's important to note is that our main goal is to work with all of our students and student organizations to educate them on these policies and to make sure that we work together as one to ensure peaceful protests throughout the campus and to maintain our educational mission at the institution. Our policies are designed to make sure that our students know our various rules and regulations and to work together to make sure that they are in an environment in which they can share their thoughts in a manner that is within our policies, but at the same time, make sure that they understand that all of our views are upheld, views for and views that may be in dissent of what that particular organization feels. We make sure that we emphasize moving away from a hostile environment and making sure that our goals that we permit with free speech, although once again we may have dissenters, create an environment in which students are educated. Our policies have been under review in regards to campus expression since spring of 2023. And at the time, we had a student event where we felt as if our policies did not meet the needs of our students related to indoor space and how our speakers are engaged with our registered student organizations. Following the events of the spring of 2023, we gathered the following summer of 2023 and got constituents together to ascertain where these gaps were and how we could move forward in supporting our students, and we have worked on that policy for the past year and a half. In regards to our interim campus expression policy, these policies are once again designed to provide for a robust debate and a robust opportunity for our students to express themselves, while at the same time ensuring that we uphold Virginia state statutes and also the policies of VCU as it relates to masking and encampments. I'm pleased to say that our most recent BOV meeting, we had extensive comments from students on their perspectives. Several were related to various views, and although the students were passionate, they did not disrespect or disrupt the BOV environment, and I think a lot of that goes to a campus-wide understanding of our policies and procedures at VCU. Madam Chair and the committee members, thank you for the opportunity to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. Next on our list is Dr. Juliet Landfair, Vice President of Student Affairs from the University of Mary Washington.
Good afternoon, Senators. I'm Dr. Juliet Landfair. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs at the University of Mary Washington. I appreciate this time with you today and the opportunity to provide a statement. At the University of Mary Washington, after October 7th, 2023, throughout the academic year, students at Mary Washington participated in several peaceful demonstrations. The demonstrations included vigils, tabling, and other expressions of solidarity with the civilians of Gaza. The student organizers followed UMW's reservation policies to schedule times and locations for these demonstrations. At the end of the spring semester, as we were preparing for the final exam period, one demonstration on an outdoor campus green space called Jefferson Square eventually ended with the arrest of 12 individuals, including 9 UMW students and 3 other individuals unaffiliated with Mary Washington. State police officers assisted UMW police with the arrests. A few weeks later, on June 6, after consulting with our president, Troy Pano, Commonwealth's attorney, Libby Humphreys, filed a nolle pros, dropping the charges against the students, stating that she would prefer for the UMW student conduct process to handle the matter. A few weeks later, the 3 non-student demonstrators entered pleas of no contest to misdemeanor trespassing charges, and their charges were dismissed contingent on the completion of community service and other requirements. Alongside my colleagues around the Commonwealth, and as you've heard from other testimony, over the summer and into the academic year, we continue to examine the takeaways and lessons learned from this last year, including how to best balance the complexities of free speech rights, a key principle of any learning institution, while keeping our campus safe and secure within the context of the limited resources we have available. At Mary Washington, we have 2 free expression policies, one for affiliated community members and one for unaffiliated community members. These policies were developed in 2014 and revised in 2017. Since 2017, and actually including this summer and the aftermath of the spring, we have actually not made any substantive changes to these free expression policies. They are publicly available on our free speech website. Both policies support the rights and principles of free speech and also have content-neutral time, place, and manner guidelines. While our expressive activity policy did not change, we did amend our reservation guidelines this summer to prohibit reserving outdoor spaces overnight. Senators, what happened at the end of April was indeed a very painful time for our institution, where we care very deeply for each and every student, and we know them individually as well as collectively. I appreciate so much your exploring alongside us the complexities of managing free speech, maintaining safety, and addressing the diverse needs of a campus community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Dr. Rose Pascarell from George Mason University, Vice President of University Life.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you so much for the invitation. Again, I'm Rose Pascarell, Vice President for University Life at George Mason. I've been in that role for 10 years, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. David Ferris, who is the Assistant Vice President for Risk, Safety, and Resilience, and we will share the podium. I'll speak to our general response to demonstrations in campus climate last year, and Dave will provide some specifics that you've asked for on policies and timelines. I know that you likely know Mason. With more than 40,000 students, we have a richly diverse student body. Our motto is freedom and learning, and our mission and how we describe ourselves. We are an innovative and an inclusive academic community committed to creating a more just, free, and prosperous world. We are not strangers to various communities, both in connection and in conflict with each other. Throughout the last year, our approach has been to safeguard our campus mission and educational purpose, to care for our communities while facilitating constitutionally protected student expression. To quickly provide context, the increase in anti-Semitism on college campuses pre-existed the October 7th attack by Hamas, and prior to October 7th, we were increasing our efforts at fostering a more inclusive campus environment for Jewish students. Shortly after the October 7th attack, and after speaking with George Mason President, our President Greg Washington, I sent a message to Jewish students, and the Assistant VP for University Life sent a message to our Palestinian students, offering resources for support. They are all our students. It is not atypical that we would message students who may be directly impacted by a global conflict. In fact, in the days, weeks, and months that followed, and beginning with President Washington, we hosted meetings for Jewish, Palestinian, and Muslim students. At students' request, both the rector, the former rector, and vice rector met privately with Jewish students and then again with Palestinian students. We were in regular contact with our campus Hillel director and rabbi. We communicated directly with members of Students for Justice in Palestine on policy and protocol. Our goal and approach was transparency with students every step of the way. As I reached out to affected communities, President Washington sent messages to the university community to address anxieties and questions expressed by faculty, staff, and other students about the campus climate in general. Between October 10th and May 1st, Dr. Washington issued 7 separate messages aimed at guiding, calming, and de-escalating the campus climate. In terms of protests or demonstrations, our Students for Justice in Palestine student organization generally did a weekly call out for students to join them at Wilkins Plaza, which is in the center of our Fairfax campus, where they demonstrated their support for Gaza and the Palestinian resistance. These protests were attended by anywhere from 100 to 200 people on a given week. I think the key for us is that those participating in the protests were by and large Mason students, and they were nonviolent protests. For the most part, we did not deal with well-organized outsiders, as some of my colleagues did, who were leveraging place and moment at the expense of our students. Mason did not experience an encampment in the same way some of my colleagues did. We did have a 2.5-week period prior to spring break and before encampments occurred on other college campuses where students in support of Palestine staged daily sit-ins on the lawn in front of our administration building from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. It was made clear at the outset that overnight encampments were not permitted on Mason's campus, and students complied. All activities complied with our requirements to be lawful, safe, and non-disruptive. I want to be transparent and honest in describing the campus climate. Although the protests over the course of the year were largely peaceful, that did not minimize the fear and outrage experienced by some in our Jewish student community. I can tell you that some of our Jewish students were genuinely fearful, offended, and felt harassed at some of the inflammatory chants that students were yelling. We received complaints throughout the year. After October 7th and through the end of the academic year, there were 32 bias incidents reported by Jewish students.
We don't know what those chants were. What were the chants?
Senator Peake, we'll ask our official to complete the testimony, and then we will direct any questions to be answered.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This is just outrageous. We have people here from our institutions. You called us here to investigate this. You said one of the purposes of the meeting was to get to understand the individual institutional responses to these demonstrations. We've now heard from 3 institutional representatives. You've not allowed us to ask questions. We have another one. That's the purpose of this meeting. That's goal number 2. To understand the individual institutional responses to these demonstrations. And you're not going to allow us to ask the representatives of these institutions questions. This is absurd. It's insane. Why are we here if that's the number 2 goal and we can't ask them questions?
Senator Peake, we will be asking those questions, and we will be directing those questions to the institutions for
when?
comment.
We're here today. Madam Chair, when? Is there a meeting scheduled? Madam Chair, when?
Let us complete this testimony.
Do y'all want to leave?
Well, also, our First Amendment rights are being squashed. Everybody else up here talked
irony
about
is not lost.
free speech.
We are
free
elected
speech, and we don't have any free speech.
We are elected to be here to ask the hard questions. We must be able to ask. We must be able to ask these questions. Otherwise, this meeting is a sham. We fully intend to continue to ask questions. We will not be silenced. In this meeting, we will ask questions here. All of us intend to.
Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think in your opening remarks, you were attempting to set the stage so we could have an objective and sort of investigative type environment, which is a little different than our usual committee meetings where we're looking at a specific piece of legislation. I think we're trying to learn what the universities have done and to hear from other representatives, but we want the dialogue this time, I believe, to be in the broader context of the situations that may have happened, the university policies, whatever state codes that the universities may or may not be following. So I think the effort is to try to get more information rather than less, and to keep the emotion maybe to a minimum so we can actually do a good fact-finding effort. That's how I'm interpreting your instruction, but I do understand that my colleagues have some reservations, and I think you said we could ask the question publicly, but the answer would be provided in writing. Is that correct?
Thank you, Senator Favola. Yes. One thing that we are trying to do is to compile a written and organized understanding of what happened on our college campuses last year. That's part of the academic process. That's part of the research that we are engaged in. And so rather than engaging in a back and forth, the purpose is a more scholarly attempt to ask the questions that will then be shared with our individual organizations and our institutions, giving them the time to provide the response. The responses to a lot of these concerns are not easy ones. They require supportive documentation. They require universities' information, and we will give them the time to provide that full scope, and that will be certainly available to all committee members in the next several weeks. If you can continue and complete your testimony,
I'm
thank you.
so sorry to the speaker, but
Senator Durant, you're not on my list. If you will
But I
log
am.
in, I will recognize you. Senator Craig,
Thank
are
you so
first.
much. Thank you so much, Ms. Chairman. So they're prepared because they have prepared speeches. So they've had time to prepare to speak to us. It's very difficult to listen to them and then try to take notes. It would be so much easier to say, hey, we have a question of, I had a question on UVA, why they dismissed all of the charges from the protesters. I wanted to ask the UVA person that question, but we weren't given that, and we weren't given the time. And it would be so much easier if we could ask them. I mean, we can just say 3 minutes of questions once the 3 minutes are over, but it's going to be very difficult for us to have to remember who spoke, what they said, take down notes for this whole entire meeting. We've never done this before, and it's just disheartening that we are not allowed to, have a open dialogue. That's how we get things accomplished here, and I'm very disappointed in the way we're being treated today up here on the dais.
Thank you, Senator Craig. I have heard your question. I think it's a good question, and we will ask our representatives from the University of Virginia to respond to that in a written comment after this meeting. Thank you. Senator Durant, your name is on the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for jumping on my colleague. Just to clarify on what Senator Favolo had stated, the opportunity for us to ask questions while they're here and what you have described as an academic format, which I would prefer more of a Socratic academic format where it's interactive. When they're here, we need to be able to ask those questions. If they need to follow up with us, I certainly understand. But I feel very strongly that this needs to be, we have our questions, we have a lot that we want to be able to cover, but there's also organic questions that have arisen because of the testimony that it's going to be a bit of overwhelming. It makes this process ineffective. And I don't think that the mission of this committee meeting is being fulfilled by stifling the opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you, Senator Durant. As shared previously, you have the opportunity to ask questions, and
Thank you. I appreciate it. After October 7th and through the end of the academic year, there were 32 bias incidents reported by Jewish students. The majority of these were not actionable, but we certainly kept track of what our students were experiencing, and we were constantly taking the temperature of the campus. At the same time, members of our Palestinian community, and Mason has always had a larger than typical Palestinian student population, also reported being targeted. There were 19 reported incidents of bias reported by our Palestinian and Muslim students. In terms of reporting trends, both of these numbers are likely somewhat lower than what students experienced. Our approach to demonstrations, expressive activity, and general student unrest over the last year was a highly collaborative top-down and bottom-up strategy. Out of our collaborative conversations, we developed a rapid response team in student life when a protest demonstration was occurring. In that model, a staff member was paired with a staff member from emergency management as the intentional first point of contact with students. Police were always on hand and not far away, but they were also the last resort and only called on if students were non-compliant. Regarding law enforcement, there was close coordination between senior leadership and university police on approach. Students could peacefully protest, but they needed to adhere to our policies. I should also add that police were on hand when both Jewish and Palestinian students were hosting activities. The intention was to provide safety so that these events could occur uninterrupted. I can't overstate the significance of continual communication and transparency with our students. even when they were not getting the outcomes they hoped for, reiterating our commitment to a safe campus, our condemnation of anti-Semitism, our commitment to free speech, and just listening to Jewish student experiences was a priority. And meeting with the leaders of Students for Justice in Palestine, reiterating our commitment to free speech, our commitment to a safe campus, our condemnation of anti-Palestinian and anti-Muslim sentiment, and just listening to Palestinian and Muslim student experience was also a priority, even when they were not getting the outcomes they hoped for. Throughout the year, we appeared partisan to some in both communities because of the legally expressive activities students participated in, but staying in communication was still important. That is an inevitable byproduct of the balancing act a public university must perform in these circumstances. The key takeaways I would highlight for the committee were our all-in collaborative approach and our focus on transparent communication with students. My colleague Dave Ferris will comment on policy and timelines.
Madam Chair and Senators, thank you very much for this opportunity to share our experience with you, and thank you, Rose. On October 2023, shortly after the events of October 7th and before an incident occurred on campus, a working group was convened to conduct a thorough evaluation of our applicable policies to ensure that our policies are clear, comprehensive, unbiased, consistent with free speech laws, and free from contradiction. George Mason has three primary policies that govern public events and activities on campus. These are space utilization and scheduling, amplified sound, and poster postings on campus. We examined policies to confirm policies were aligned with applicable laws. We reviewed policy enforcement and documented the escalation procedures when policy violations are observed. We assigned administrators to engage with students and student groups to discuss and enforce policy and solicit feedback. We used our experience managing a variety of events on campus, not only demonstrations, to test hypothetical policy revisions and reveal potential unintended consequences. We identified the need to develop policies regarding amplified sound on campus. Our previous policy was intended to mimic local noise ordinances and only govern sound at the borders of campus. In December of 2023, at the request of our previous rector, we drafted Policy 1408, Concealment of Identity, to address the wearing of face coverings on campus, and this policy was exercised for the first time during winter commencement in 2023. November 2023 through March 2024, policy revisions continued among the working group, and this was a very slow and deliberate process with much debate as we strove to ensure that policy revisions considered the preservation of safety, research, instruction, events, university operations, and property. We wanted to support a vibrant and diverse campus community, protect freedom of expression, and we worked to make sure that all events on campus were successful and mitigate disruptions. In March 2024, ultimately, the three policies that I previously mentioned were revised, and although our policies might appear new, there were very few substantial changes, with the exception of expanding requirements for space reservations on campus. We now require a space reservation whenever amplified sound is used, with the exception of personal devices, and whenever items are placed on university property. The remaining policy revisions clarified language to mitigate misinterpretation and resolve minor procedural issues. To meet our overarching objective, which is to prevent disruptions to campus operations, instruction, and research, we developed a document aptly titled Guidance for Assessing When Behaviors Are Disruptive to Campus Operations, to assist our community in understanding which behaviors may be considered disruptive and are therefore potentially prohibited and may result in the removal from, modification of, cancellation, or relocation of an event to include demonstrations and protests. In the summer of 2024, we convened over 100 administrators responsible for campus operations in 3 separate sessions to review First Amendment fundamentals, policies and procedures pertaining to freedom of expression on campus, and how the institution will engage with individuals and groups that do not adhere to university policies. We are also meeting with student groups to educate them on policy content, scope, and application. In August of 2024, we revised Policy 1103, Space Utilization and Scheduling, to address camping tents and encampments on university property. And we recently revised Policy 1201, Non-Discrimination, to include additional considerations for the evaluation of potentially anti-Semitic behavior in accordance with federal and Commonwealth of Virginia executive guidance. Our policy working group continues to meet routinely to address events on campus, discuss policy, and revise policies and procedures as necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I don't believe we caught your name, sir, and your position on the campus.
Yes, ma'am. My name is David Ferris. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Risk, Safety, and Resilience.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Ferris. And our final speaker in this section is Dr. Michael Polyakoff, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, from the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. This organization, ACTA, reached out and expressed interest in presenting to us because of the work that ACTA has been doing with our colleges and universities. Is Dr. Polyakoff here today? He is not by any chance online, is he? We did have an in-person note for us. He is, okay. If we can have him online then.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hashmi, and distinguished members of the Senate Committee on Education.
Doctor, are you able to turn on your video so that we may see you?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think I've now got that. Yes, okay. Apologies for that. Thank you, Chair Hashmi, and distinguished members of the Senate Committee on Education and Health. My name is Michael Polyakoff, and I'm president of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. This summer, ACTA wrote and distributed An Equal Space for All, a guide for trustees on preventing encampments and occupations. It is heartening when we see universities now taking proactive steps to avoid the national and international disgrace of the campus behaviors last spring. Vigilance is in order. Last spring, manuals for disruption circulated in group chats, guidance such as a de-arrest primer and a do-it-yourself occupation guide. The anti-Semitic threats and harassment of Jewish students represent moral outrage and arguably a violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Hence, ACTA advises every university, with strong oversight from visitors, to review the student code of conduct, making impermissible behavior and the disciplinary consequences absolutely clear. And that includes, as we've heard, banning overnight camping, limitations on noise and use of amplifiers, requiring mass students to produce ID, as we heard from UVA, VCU, and GMU, and reasonable restrictions to prevent the obstruction of access. And this is very important: establish and enforce severe penalties for infractions, typically suspension or expulsion. And as part of student registration, require students to sign a form committing themselves to honor the student code of conduct and making the consequences for violation clear. And finally, adopting a policy of institutional neutrality is an important way to change the culture of campus discourse. Schools like the University of Chicago have de-escalated tension by making it clear that financial and investment policies are not matters to be decided by campus protests. Political commitment and protest are in the DNA of American freedom. They flourish on campuses that also protect the working structures of an academic institution. And I'm grateful to you for this opportunity to share these thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Polyakoff. I appreciate your comments, and thank you for joining us. And at this time, if there are any questions that we will want to pursue further, I'll welcome our committee members. I have a question that I'd like to direct to our attorney, Julia. If you're able to clarify, in our code, do we have a requirement that our colleges and universities provide opportunities for the public dissemination of their policies and procedures requiring around student demonstrations? Is that a requirement in the code that colleges and universities publish that in an available space such as a website?
Madam Chair, yes, Section 23.1-401.1 of the Code requires each public institution of higher education to establish and include in its student handbook, on its website, and in any student orientation programs its policies regarding speech that is protected under the First Amendment. And it Additionally, requires them to include in that the process to report incidents of disruption of such speech, develop materials on such policies, and notify any employee who is responsible for the discipline or education of enrolled students of such materials, and develop, post on its website in a searchable, publicly accessible, and conspicuous manner a report on the institution's compliance relating to free speech on campus no later than December 1st of each year.
Thank you. And I think as part of our next steps is to ensure that that information is publicly available and shared on each of our institutions' websites. I have a second question, Julia, also. Do we have in code a clear policy on the requirement of shared governance as it pertains to making any policy changes and how shared governance ought to be recognized and followed on our college campuses?
Madam Chair, may I ask you to clarify what you mean by shared governance?
Shared governance is a policy that outlines the ways in which faculty voices, staff voices, and oftentimes student voices are part of any necessary changes that a college might be making, that an institution might be making on policy matters, that the voices of the entire college community be a part of policy changes.
Madam Chair, Section 23.1-1303 of the Code, which applies to the duties of each governing board of each public institution of higher education, contains various requirements that requirements relating to transparency and discussions and actions on topics that require an open meeting of the board, public notice requirements for meetings, and any action that requires a public meeting. Also are required to establish regulations or policies for the acceptance and desistance of students. And additionally, I apologize. Solicit the input of representatives of the institution's faculty senate or its equivalent on certain academic topics of general interest to the faculty, and in advance of decisions to be made on the search for the institution's new chief executive officer. And that appears to be the general requirements relating to that.
Thank you very much for that clarification. So I think one item that I will be asking our institutions to clarify is the ways in which shared governance is outlined at their institutions and what steps were taken to ensure that the policies around shared governance were followed in the any changes in policy matters with regard to student demonstrations and free speech issues on the campuses. So we will make note of that question and certainly raise that with our institutions. Senator Durant, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to follow up on that line. I noticed that over the summer, some universities have updated their policies with the time, place, and manner policies, and I believe George Mason University's, do we have someone still here from George Mason that can confirm that they have a time, manner, and place policy in place with requiring a permit in order to hold a rally?
Thank you.
I don't know if we have any other, I just wanted to see if we have any other institutions in the Commonwealth that have that similar time, place, and manner policy that we see with George Mason as well as Cal State.
Thank you, Senator Durant. That is an excellent research question, and I will ask Julia to ensure that she researches that question and provides an answer to the entire committee on that. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Durant.
And just clarifying when it comes to free speech, the First Amendment, there are thick books that are out there going back, delving into the manners in which we have free speech and the parameters of it. But I think it's really important for this committee to note that the threats of violence and incitement are outside the First Amendment protections, and that must be in place in our college campuses and universities, particularly when it comes to inside interfering with the manners in which students are paying in order to get an education.
Thank you, Senator Durant. That's another excellent research question for us to follow up with, and we will be providing responses to that. Senator Peake.
Yes, Madam Chair. Question. Is the no questions policy, did that just apply to our institutional representatives? Are we going to be able to ask the other people who testify here today questions?
Thank you, Senator Peake, for that question. We have over 30 individuals who will be speaking to us, and most of these are individuals who can only speak to their personal experiences. We have just a few organizational representatives. So for that reason, our focus is on the full scope of experiences. The larger institutional and organizational voices are critical to this conversation. We are receiving individual testimony, both written and oral today, but we will not be asking individuals to address direct questions about their personal experiences.
So, Madam Chair, then we will not be allowed to ask anyone who presents any testimony.
Your
today
mic is
here
off,
live.
sir.
Ma'am?
Your mic is off, sir.
Says it's on. That's all, I got the wrong mic. Let's go to this mic. So, anyone who testifies here today, we cannot ask them questions about their testimony. Is that the position of the chair?
You can raise questions and we will direct them if you have an individual. But again, most of these individuals who are here today are speaking to a personal experience. We gather these personal experiences, but the larger goal of this committee is to address the kind of changes that we need to see, if necessary, on college campuses, to address policy issues, not to address individual personal experiences. But the scope of their personal experiences certainly illuminate what happened on college campuses, and for that reason, we will receive testimony from a variety of individuals. And again, because of time limitations, people will be speaking only for 2 minutes, but many of these individuals have already submitted written testimony that is available, and hopefully you have read in advance of this meeting.
So, Madam Chair, just to let me clarify, we're having a hearing today starting at 2:30, probably go to about 5:30 or 6 on free speech. And then we're going to have individuals speak to us about their free speech, but the senators, who represent 210,000 people in the Commonwealth, are prohibited from free speech and asking questions of the witnesses here today. Is that correct?
Senator Peake, we are not stifling your speech. You're able to articulate any questions, any concerns you have. We will simply not be engaging in a back and forth with individuals who are here to speak about their personal experiences. But you have been given ample opportunity to voice your discontent at this point, and we've made note of it. And your speech is not being stifled, but when you have the questions, please articulate them so that we may direct them to organizations and to institutions so that we can proceed in thinking about policy changes. Are there any questions from the committee members? Let us proceed then to our individuals who have signed up, and we will go in the order in which our community members had reached out, and we will do in-person testimony first, and then hear from our online speakers. And then, just as a quick reminder again, our speakers will be limited to 2 minutes each, and the mic will be turned off automatically at the 2-minute mark. There is a timer, so please be conscious of that. And again, I ask you to speak directly to your own personal experiences and not attempt to engage in any matters that are outside of the scope of this particular meeting. And with that, I believe our first speaker is Caitlin Lee. Thank you, Caitlin, and you'll see the timer has started.
Hi, good afternoon, members of the Senate Education Health Committee. My name is Caitlin Lee. I'm a third-year senior at BCU, and I come to speak in front of you today to tell you about how my comrades and I were brutalized, attacked, and assaulted by 3 different police jurisdictions, including VCU Police, Richmond City Police, and Virginia State Police on April 29th, 2024. Before I begin, I would like to address the fact that we were only given 2 minutes to speak today, and that is nowhere near enough time to explain the truly catastrophic events that occurred on April 29th. I urge you to take our words to heart, but to please hear us out in our written testimonies as well. I was present at the liberated zone for Gaza the entire day, and no police were present until approximately 8:15. As the sun was setting, my friend texted me that about 3 blocks away from the liberated zone, there was a horde of police presence, including cars, vans, and bikes. Took up about 2 empty parking lots. I want you to think about how many police officers that is for a minute, all of which suited up in riot gear, tear gas, and military-grade weapons. 10 minutes after that text, the police ambushed our camp, providing no notice other than the sounds of sirens and the use of intimidation tactics. They waited until dark to brutalize their own students. And as someone who was on the front lines, there was no communication from the police once they showed up. We were immediately attacked. They lined up in their gear and cornered students from all sides of our library lawn. As they approached us, VCU sent out campus-wide alerts stating that a violent protest was occurring and that there was a large police presence to avoid the area. Let me be abundantly clear when I say that there was no violence until the police showed up. Students were shoved, beaten, punched, grabbed, and sprayed relentlessly with tear gas. I witnessed countless officers singling students away from the group so they would be easier to arrest. I watched my best friend get shoved with a riot shield and almost get arrested over 4 times, to which she was left with a severe concussion, a torn shoulder, and an injured leg. I personally was tear gassed and shoved to the ground a few times, where I watched countless other students shriek in terror from the violence that the police brought.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amy Melnick-Scharf from the Jewish Community Federation of Richmond.
Hello. If the equivalent of October 7th had happened in the U.S., 44,000 Americans would have been slaughtered and over 10,000 taken hostage. Since then, as they mourned and prayed for their friends and family, Jewish students on Virginia campuses have been threatened with violence, excluded from campus life, as we just heard, restricted from university buildings and areas on campus, and have not felt safe on taxpayer-supported campuses. My name is Amy Melnick-Scharf. Thank you for having me today. I'm speaking on behalf of Virginia's Jewish Community Relation Councils, representing hundreds and thousands of Virginians. I want to be clear. I stand before you as a staunch advocate of free speech and peaceful protest. However, I want to be even clearer. The protests that occurred and continue today on college campuses here in Virginia are not always peaceful and veer into anti-Semitism, calls for violence, and extremism, celebrating the horrors of October 7th. Far too often, Jewish students and faculty found their voices silenced, their right to free speech violated, their paths to Sabbath dinners blocked by fences, banners, and shouts, their classrooms, libraries, and dorms turned into Zionist-free zones, again, as we just heard. This is the new PC name for Jew-free zones. Jewish students' rights to equal protection under the law had been ignored by university leadership. This double standard is unacceptable and against the law. Criticism of Israel, First Amendment right, protected free speech. However, demonizing and vilifying Israel and threatening its existence by any means necessary, you are calling for the elimination of half the world's Jewish population and threatening Jewish people everywhere. We are grateful for the initial steps that many Virginia universities have taken to make campuses safe and inclusive for all students, which is an obligation under the law. Implementing the time, place, and manner policy will still permit free speech to flourish on our campuses. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rabbi Litt from the College of William and Mary.
Madam Chair, distinguished senators, good afternoon. My name is Rabbi Gershon Litt. I'm the Hill Director at William and Mary. I'm here today to offer a Jewish perspective to what has been recently presented at demonstrations across the Commonwealth. I've attended many SJP rallies and heard their chants. When they scream, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," the Jewish students don't hear a call for self-determination. They hear a call for their relatives and friends, over 7 million of them, to be pushed out of Israel and Israel to be made Jew-free. When SJP screams about not needing the Jewish homeland, what our Jewish students and others hear is that SJP wants a one-state solution, a Palestinian solution. When SJP screams back to 48, what our Jewish students hear is not a desire for a conversation about peoplehood. They hear a desire to rid the land of their family and friends. When SJP chants, "Long live the Intifada," Jews recall their families and friends being blown up in cafes and coffee shops. They recall buses blowing up, killing many people, women, children, Jew and Arab alike. The two intifadas in Israel collectively claimed the lives of over 1,400 Israelis in some of the most sadistic and horrible methods imaginable. On October 9th, 2001, the Sparrow's Pizza Shop in Jerusalem was blown up. That one incident claimed the lives of 15 people immediately, including 7 children and a pregnant woman. Those are the people that I think about when I hear, "Long live the Intifada." On October 10th, 2023, myself and a group of Jewish students were approached on campus by members of SJP who screamed in our faces, "It made us feel like the brutal murder of 1,100 Jews in Israel and others, and the kidnapping of over 250 of our brothers and sisters on October 7th was our fault," calling us horrible names just days after the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, weeks before the current war began. If our words defined our intent, then allow the words of SJP to speak for themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Emily Kramer from VCU.
Hello, my name is Emily Kramer, and I'm currently in my 3rd year at VCU. I've submitted a written testimony about my detailed experience during the encampment that occurred on April 29th. I want to preface that what happened that night was not okay. As students and as a community, we were brutalized and left to face the traumas of that night on our own. Due to only being allotted 2 minutes to speak, I will be addressing a more recent conversation I had with officers from VCU PD regarding the police presence at the encampment last year. As a criminal justice student, I was given the opportunity to ask these officers questions during one of my classes. I decided to ask them how they felt about what happened on April 29th and if they believed things should have gone differently or not. The responses I got were infuriating. The first officer stated she was on the front lines that day and believes, quote, "it was handled appropriately and the right to freedom of speech wasn't taken away from anyone," quote. She states it was, quote, "more for the safety of everyone, and they wanted to make sure the entire community was safe," quote. She also says once the police were present, they, quote, "gave ample amount of time for individuals to decide how they want to be handled." I would like to comment that brutalizing students and other people that were present does not equal a situation being handled appropriately. Freedom of speech was taken away and continues to be taken away as VCU has been updating and creating policies that limit our right to speak and protest. I'm unsure how ambushing a group of people at night is keeping the entire community safe. I also find it dehumanizing to hear her say that individuals were given time to decide how they want to be handled. We should not have been handled, we should have been communicated to rather than ambushed and attacked. The second officer stated that, quote, "everyone has a right to come on campus and protest and demonstrate, but when you affect the safety of other people on campus, they will want us, the police, to step in," quote. My only question is, how did we affect the safety of the community? What do we do to make the community feel unsafe? Because once again, we were completely peaceful in our gathering, and it was only named a violent protest once the police showed up. Thanks.
As a reminder, we will refrain from any kind of audible clapping or other demonstrations. Thank you for abiding by the protocol of the Senate. Our next speaker is Serene Haddad, again from VCU.
I'm here as a Palestinian student that goes to VCU, and I'm no longer proud of the university I attend. Since October, I've had more than 152 of my family members in Gaza be murdered in the ongoing genocide. The most recent murder being my 14-year-old cousin who was bombed while trying to get bread for his family. This did not start on October 7th, it started 76 years ago. On Monday, April 29th, the 206th night in the ongoing genocide, 3 police forces brutalized the people present at VCU's encampment, a peaceful protest with the aim to pressure the university to divest from Israel. VCU representatives claimed to want to steer away from a hostile environment, but they were the one who created it. The violence present was state-sanctioned.
Madam Chair, they could speak.
My time be paused?
Madam Chair.
My time be paused?
Yes,
Thank you.
But we don't have to sit and use the phrases of murder and genocide. And I just note the objection. I have the right to object to that. I do object to that. But I don't have the right to ask her questions.
Freedom of speech.
And this came after Hamas on October 7th murdered 1,100 innocent Israelis. And to come in here and talk about genocide and I can't ask questions really infuriates me.
It is.
College, yeah.
It is.
We're talking about genocide and murder, and yes, that is what we're supposed to be on. VCU, yeah.
If you want to speak, put your name on the board. You are not recognized. Senator Locke.
Madam Chair, I think the interruption of this student was totally uncalled for, and she should be allowed to say whatever it is that she wants to say. This is her incident of what happened with her and her issue. I think that what just happened right then and there was totally uncalled for.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
And you're still continuing to do that, Senator Peake.
But Madam Chair,
Senator
we were
Peake.
told at the beginning of this hearing we were not going to talk about world affairs. We were going to talk about what happened on these university campuses.
She's talking about what happened to her on that university
No,
campus.
she mentioned genocide and the murder of her brother
Her
or cousin.
family.
Yeah, family. That is not what happened at VCU, Madam Chair. So if they're going to talk about world
Peake,
affairs,
you're out of order right now. Senator Peake.
are we going to follow the rules or not, Madam Chair? Are we going to talk about what happened on the campuses? Or are we going to talk about world affairs in Hamas, Israel?
It's tied into what I was going to say, sir.
Please do not respond.
Yes, ma'am.
Please remember to direct all comments to the chair. And Senator Peake, you interrupted a speaker, and I will ask us all on this committee to refrain from interrupting a speaker. We will allow this speaker to complete her testimony.
Can I get a redo on my time?
It was paused at that moment. Please continue.
The violence that arrived was state-sanctioned on buses with riot gear and shields and not from students with dancing, tents, and cardboard signs. Any suggestion this level of response was appropriate was absolutely repulsive. I was thrown down violently on cement 6 times, ended up with bruises all over my body, head trauma, shoulder, and knee injuries. I was hospitalized, barely able to breathe due to the police-sanctioned chemicals lodged in my lungs and throat. Need I remind you, this all happened because VCU stands by the decision because of a policy break. Plastic on a lawn. I raised my voice April 29th advocating for the hundreds of my family members that were brutally murdered and asking the university to divest from such atrocities. Instead, I was physically silenced and brutalized. This dismissal is not just a failure to listen, it is a failure of moral leadership. I am not feeling safe as a Palestinian student at my own institution that profits off my own family's genocide. I faced brutality not in Gaza, but here in America, in the place that's promised to speak freely. My only crime was standing up for my murdered family in Gaza, and instead I was repressed. This is not an attack on me, it's an attack on everybody's free speech. 152 of my family members were slaughtered in Gaza, taken in the most violent ways imaginable, and while I grieve for them and carry the weight of their absence, I was brutalized when I tried to speak out. And instead of allowing me to mourn, my university, the very institution to protect my own rights, became the oppressor. What does it say about our state of democracy when a student trying to speak for 152 relatives is seen as a threat and silenced? My university has blood on its hands, not just for silencing me, but for standing complicit in the face of atrocity. Free Palestine.
Our next speaker is Rabbi Asher. Senator Durant, what is your point?
Madam Chair, our colleague, Senator Peake, is absolutely correct that the rules that were stated for this committee were to be limited, and we just saw a very clear example of melding together between an experience on this campus and a broader international issue. This opens up whether or not this committee is going to follow and stick with it. I would like to know, Madam Chair, I fully anticipate that this conversation and this testimonies are going to continue to expand beyond the scope of what happened on our colleges and campus and universities in Virginia. What is the policy when that conversation continues to go outside the scope of what the purpose of this meeting is today?
Thank you, Senator Durant, and we are reminding our speakers, I believe what we heard was a Palestinian American who was talking about her family in the context of her personal experiences. And I remind everyone to limit to their personal experiences what they had, what they went through during this period of campus protest as a reminder. And we have Senator Favola on the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do hope that we can have some parameter here for having this conversation. We want to hear from all of you who have signed up. We respect your experiences and your perspective. I just want to make a note that the purpose of this hearing, as I understand it, is to link your experiences to what you experienced on the college campus. We are trying to very much understand how our colleges are operating in terms of allowing demonstrations, allowing the expression of your freedom of speech, while at the same time ensuring that such demonstrations do not escalate into violence. So our context here is not international. It is trying to understand how you experienced life on your college campus and how you felt in expressing your views. That's how I am viewing this conversation. I hope it is a parameter that all of us can embrace. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Senator Favola. We do want to hear from everyone. I want to hear from everyone, not just one set. Did you say you were not going to allow this? Because she needs to be thrown out. She keeps running her mouth. Yes, you were. We're directing it right to me. I suggest you be quiet because I will have you thrown out.
Senator Craig.
How about that?
Senator Craig.
As I was saying,
I remind you that you will address the chair and not audience members.
Well, then tell them to act right.
I had not observed.
So anyway,
Craig.
what I was saying was I do want to hear from everyone. But again, we need to, like Senator Favola said, we need to have it directly just relating to the issues so we can deal with the issues. I cannot handle and cannot, we do not legislate international. We are here to legislate our campuses for the security of everyone, not just one group. Thank you.
You are absolutely correct. We are not here to talk about international affairs. I remind our committee members to also practice decorum and to address questions directly to the chair. And if issues are occurring in the audience, share that with me because I am looking at you. I'm not looking at the audience. Please share your concerns with me directly.
I apologize. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we will hear from Rabbi Asher.
It is personal. David Asher, Rabbi, Knesset Beth Israel. It isn't bad enough they scream Genocide Joe, Killer Kamala, try to physically drag Tim Kaine from the hotel, storm our Capitol when Netanyahu spoke, throw fireworks at our police. 7.5 out of 9 million Jews from Christian Europe, 900,000 out of 1 million driven from Muslim countries last century. October 7th, 1,200 were raped, burned, murdered in a genocide. Supposed to be 40 million... Can you pause, please? Can I have my time?
Rabbi Asher.
It's gonna be directed, obviously.
Rabbi Asher, if the audience is not going to be quiet, we will be clearing the individuals. I ask you to remain quiet. Rabbi Asher, please.
It's gonna be
Please go immediately to your personal experiences. Please do not speak on foreign issues, international issues. Please go to your direct experience.
Supposed to be 40 million Jews today. There are only 15 million left. What do we have to do to be seen? Do we also have to protest the DNC? Congratulations, you've gone under our skin, intimidated us. Israel's fighting a war it doesn't want on 5 sides. We don't have anything to do with that war. Leave us alone. Stop screaming outside our buildings. Stop screaming at our campuses. Stop attacking our kids. You want to protest for 5 hours instead of 4 hours in this park instead of that park? Go ahead. We're trying to get safety for students and educators. We will fight you on policy, but we are tired of violence here in America. We can't help you with this, Prime Minister. Not all of us are Zionists, but the vast majority are, and many of us don't like his government. But this is about America. Why should we have to pay more for our safety? What happened to religious liberty? Every city council meeting Jews need extra security. We went to administrators and said, do something. They did, and now they're under inquiry. Every senator should ask, what can I do to end religious hatred? Incidents are skyrocketing. It's not enough to execute a Richmonder, shoot 6 civilians in the back of the head. If you don't stand with them, say it up front. Otherwise, when you shout their narrative, sing their songs on campuses, chant their chants, wear their masks, that's what we think. Every senator should think about free speech for a student to wear a Jewish star. We need to drag every story in front of you. Stand up for good. It's tragic, 25,000 non-combatants killed in this war. 100,000 Ukrainian Sudanese also dead, but nobody cares because they don't care about lives. Jew hatred is fueling these discussions. You're telling us it isn't, we're telling you it is. You're telling us it isn't, we're teaching you it is. I'm sorry to talk in this way.
A reminder to every speaker, direct your comments to the incidences on campus, to your direct experiences, to what you and your family either witnessed or went through, and share those with us. That is what will inform our next steps as we direct our attention to necessary policy. Please do not speak on international affairs. Please do not bring in foreign policy concerns. And please speak in a decorous manner to us that we may hear you and understand your concerns. Our next speaker is Ben Daughtry from University of Virginia.
My name is Ben Daughtry, they, them pronouns. I'm a librarian at the University of Virginia, and with many others, I was attacked and arrested by police at the encampment for Palestine at UVA on May 4th. I speak in my personal capacity and not as a representative of UVA. I want to speak today on the violent trauma UVA inflicted on us in the encampment and on how UVA has attempted to obfuscate what they did and to silence us afterwards. I was in the encampment when UVA administrators had state riot police attack and arrest us. In military-grade riot gear and with all kinds of weapons, they slammed into us with their riot shields and doused us with so much pepper spray from a hose or one that it felt like I had taken a shower in pepper spray. I couldn't breathe and my eyes swelled shut. The pepper spray soaked my hair, face, neck, and shoulder. They said everybody arrested got medical treatment. Not true. They said 4 men in black had entered the encampment and posed a threat. No one knows who they were talking about. UVA administrators also began retaliating, locking arrested students out of housing, withholding degrees and referring them to the University Judiciary Committee. Administrators placed a letter of counseling in my permanent employment record telling me I would face discipline up to and including termination if I ever participated in a similar protest again. Silencing us. Why? Why did these educators enact so much violence? What was the encampment pointing to for such extreme reaction?
Thank you, and I'll just share with our tech folks that comments are being delivered that people online are not able to hear the testimony. Okay. That problem should hopefully be addressed. Our next speaker is Walt Heinecke from University of Virginia.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Walt Heinecke. I'm an associate professor of research, statistics, and evaluation at the University of Virginia, School of Education and Human Development, where I've taught for 28 years. Today, I don't speak on behalf of the University of Virginia or the American Association of University Professors chapter, which I'm a member. At the students' invitation, I served as a faculty liaison for student and community protesters at the UVA encampment from late April to May 4th, the anniversary of Kent State shootings, by the way. I was intimately involved in communicating between students and university administrators and the chief of UVA police on the days leading up to May 4th. I was 15 feet away from the protesters when the Virginia State Police violently arrested them. From this vantage point, and proximity, I can state unequivocally that there was no reason for the VSP to be called to arrest the protesters. It seemed to me that the University Police Department and administrators were looking for reasons to arrest and remove the protesters from the beginning of the encampment. The encampment was peaceful until the protesters were provoked by the police. The protest had been peaceful up until the moment VSP were brought in. The encampment would have ended peacefully with no harm to students and protesters within a week had the university administrator not called in the VSP to arrest the students. Throughout my time at the encampment, it appeared to me again that the university administrators were frantically looking for ways to shut down the encampment and protest. From my perspective, the actions of university administrators and police were meant to purposefully and unlawfully restrict student and protesters' First Amendment rights to speech and assembly. It could have been handled less violently by local and university police. The encampment would have again ended naturally within a week with graduation without violence instigated by the Virginia State Police, most likely at the call of the governor, the attorney general, with the assistance of University President Jim Ryan and Provost Ian Balcom. They put students in harm's way. It was poor judgment on their behalf.
Thank you. Next speaker is Christina Sayek from VCU.
Hi, I'm Christina Saig, a Palestinian student at VCU. On April 29th, a peaceful liberated zone protest was established on the lawn in front of the library from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., where students, faculty, families, and community members engaged in various activities like chalking, painting, and studying. Administration monitored us, and we complied with every ask. Tents were set up around 5 p.m., and soon after, VCU Police, Richmond Police, and Virginia State Police arrived with zip ties, pepper spray, and tear gas. Keep in mind that the tents were only up for a couple hours, and we had not been approached by VCU PD or administrations in reference to the tents before 3 police forces had come to us. Within minutes of their arrival, I was pepper sprayed and fell to the floor. At one point, I was slammed into the glass wall of the library. The situation escalated with people running for their lives and being thrown and pushed to the ground. The medic tent was overtaken by the police, destroyed absolutely everything, and I saw my friend Serene being dragged on the concrete by the police. Throughout this time, I could not feel my body. I was in immense pain and could barely open my eyes. My roommate went to the ER that night, and they said they were preparing for mass casualties. From an academic perspective, my computer was taken that day. It was finals week, and besides me being in physical pain, I was still not able to get my work done because my laptop was taken by the police. The following day, instead of accountability and acknowledgement by VCU that they inflicted harm upon their students, VCU sent an email claiming that the police had repeatedly asked us to leave and did not use chemical agents, but instead the protesters did, which is simply not true. The chemical weapons were used against the police. However, the police, armed in riot gear, absolutely used tear gas and pepper spray on the defenseless students who were protesting. The next day, new policies were quickly introduced, restricting student protesters, restricting the number of students needed to require event authorization from 150 to 50 students, and discouraging masking. Thank you.
Thank you. Lana Birdwell from VCU.
Hello, my name is Lana Birdwell, and I'm here to convey the impact of the outrageous response that VCU, Richmond, and Virginia State Police had on me and fellow VCU students on the night of April 29th and ever since. Our goal that day was to show VCU administration that we are against the genocide of innocent Palestinians, and we do not want our money going towards companies that profit from or aid Israel. When I arrived at the gathering earlier that morning, I sat on a blanket and talked peacefully with my friends about the need for a ceasefire, divestment, and disclosure. Administrators walked by, but they didn't stop to tell us that we were violating any policy. We were not impeding foot traffic into the library or disrupting anyone in class or working on finals. Our demonstration of solidarity gave us all a sense of community and hopefulness for the future. That changed later in the evening when rumors circulated that the police were on their way to disperse the group forcefully. I naively didn't believe that they could justify using force on a harmless group of college students, but the more time went on, the more fearful I became. Truckloads of police in riot gear piled out and assembled. With no warning, they advanced toward us. I was in the second row, clinging to the student in front of me to protect them from being ripped away. At some point, they were torn from my grasp, and I found myself in the front of the group. I stood next to my friends, my skin burning from pepper spray, watching them cry to get it out of their eyes. The police motioned towards us and whispered to each other in the minutes before they attacked us again. I was terrified, something no one should ever feel when faced with police. They marched at us for the second time, and I was sprayed directly, slammed back violently towards the library window, and when I couldn't take any more, I got water from my eyes and saw students get dragged away and police destroy and confiscate our belongings. The experience left me confused and angry. College is supposed to be the place where you can express yourself freely. The disproportionate response to our peaceful demonstration was hypocritical of the ideals of free speech and expression. The actions that VCU took on April 29th were not for our protection. They only served to harm us. Additionally, the new policies VCU released restricting our ability to gather, make noise, distribute flyers, and chalk are a violation of our rights. VCU claims they were implemented to prevent disruption, but in doing so, they prevent us from sharing ideas, organizing, and be involved with decision-making at VCU, specifically regarding investments.
Thank you. Thank you, Lana. Our next speaker is Dunya Qureshi from UVA.
UVA's bureaucratic scramble to justify brutalizing their own students and faculty in a bad faith argument of updated university policy is a disingenuous claim to be proponents of free speech. Universities are the birthplace of dissent. And on the same day as the Kent State massacre, UVA decided to unlawfully call in 4 different police agencies to brutalize and arrest us. The same university that stood idly by as the KKK marched with torches and killed a woman in 2017. The same university who left their students in chaos, failing to find an active shooter just 2 years ago, somehow mobilized immediately for students protesting genocide. The only speech protected at UVA is hate speech. The students who yelled slurs and death threats to us to this day face no punishment. And while Jim Ryan hid in a bunker, the people who were actually there to witness it will forever be scarred by the violence. Despite the hundreds of calls to his office, he was nowhere to be found. I'm a Palestinian student who has watched her own family be massacred, which UVA has failed to comment on. And when I protested their investments, I was beaten, blinded, dragged to an alley, bruised, infected, banned from grounds, leaving me homeless and missing my exams for a charge ultimately dismissed. I hold no hope in this university to heed the calls for justice. We saw police stomp on water bottles, arrest press and professors, smile as they sprayed us, but we never once saw due process of law. I was held in jail for well over 7 hours without a phone call, without being read my Miranda rights, without medical care, and without being told my charges. I was in that jail for over 9 hours, and no one even asked me my name. Jim Ryan defended his dedication to state violence in a dishonest town hall with pre-selected questions. This administration, so devoid of reality, has yet to issue an apology. And as James Baldwin once said, I am terrified at the moral apathy. Thank you.
From UVA.
Contrary to what UVA has painted, the encampment on ground built community among those who attended. The community I found in the encampment was supportive in numerous ways. Students, faculty, staff, and allies had an open space to talk about our shared disgust with the genocide and apartheid Palestinians are subjected to daily. We were also able to connect on more lighthearted things, like movies, like internships, our pets and candy that we like. There were even times when people brought their kids to play and paint with the students. Personally, I never felt more welcomed on ground than at the encampment. At no point did I feel endangered by the encampment community. In fact, I felt the exact opposite. Campers were keen on making sure we didn't get doxxed by Zionists for protesting. When someone fell ill, campers offered to provide medicine. When someone hungered, others offered to bring food, water, utensils, and more. We treated each other as equals, deserving of support. Through words and deeds, my peers showed me I was safe. The University of Virginia, however, did the exact opposite on May 4th. Under the guise of protecting students, Jim Ryan and his cronies carried out a brutal beating of my peers and I. While claiming our allies were outside agitators, Jim Ryan and co. called in police, who were external to the university, of course, to threaten us with chemical weapons, point-blank rubber bullets, and M4s. On the surface, this was all over tents on grass, but when you dig a little bit deeper, it is clear this was because we decided to raise our voice in support of Palestinians' right to exist. James Ryan, Ian Balcom, Jennifer Davis, Kenyon Bonner, Timothy Longo, and all their subordinates decided it was better to terrorize their own students and community than allow us to voice concerns over investment in genocide and apartheid. Not only did they do it once, but they threatened to do it again. And that's my time.
We next will hear from Professor Anna Edwards from VCU.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Edwards. I am a faculty member at Virginia Commonwealth University in the Department of African American Studies, and I was an eyewitness to the shocking use of force that was ordered by the school's administration against peaceful students on our campus on the night of April 29th, 2024. To break up an encampment, a justifiable, organized, nonviolent political statement, I saw what appeared to be the combined formations of 3 law enforcement agencies, University, City of Richmond, and the Virginia State Police, in riot gear, move en masse against these very young people that we claim to celebrate for their sensitivity to injustice, their promise as the next generation of bright minds, for their bravery and audacity in the face of awful authority. I want to emphasize that after the police dismantled the encampment, it was they who approached students who were standing some distance away protesting their actions. It was the police who initiated the confrontation, which resulted in several students being injured. They also employed the chemical agents on those students that also affected the hundreds of onlookers, including myself. Rather than coming to meet with the students with any empathy for their position or taking seriously the earnestness of their concerns, VCU, the city, and the state chose to participate in an act of collective violence upon young people, students attending VCU from here and around the world, demonstrating their principled opposition to the ongoing and appalling killings of tens of thousands of people elsewhere. In fact, it won't soon be forgotten that our leaders chose to show our young people that of all available responses, they opt for violence.
Our next speaker is Kalia Harris from Virginia Student Power Network.
Good afternoon, Senators of the Committee and Chair Hashmi. My name is Kalia Harris. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Student Power Network, or VSPN. I'm also a former student organizer and 2-time graduate of George Mason University. I'm providing my comments here as the ED of VSPN. Our organization works to support students in Virginia. We're a statewide network of youth leaders at college campuses all over the state, including JMU, GMU, Tech, VCU, UVA, Mary Washington, William and Mary, as well as community colleges. And we work with the communities and the partners in those communities around our universities. And the larger themes that I want to highlight are that the way that the campus responded in response to the students' uprisings and solidarity with Gaza is that it was abysmal. We know that the historic legacy of campus protests and campus organizing, especially that of anti-war demonstrations, has been well documented as a thread of our reality here in the United States. Here in Virginia, we saw our universities weaponize their own policies, threaten the safety of their tax-paying students, as well as faculty, staff, and community members who were all subjected to mass arrests, weaponization of police, in some instances state, local, and university police, having their degrees withheld, discipline hearings, and more. What we know now is that the university and even community colleges such as Piedmont Valley are responding with policies that are threatening free speech and right to assembly. The way that universities have responded, from their email communications to the university community, to the response to protests, to the way that the newest policies have been enacted, such as chalk bans, discouraging masking, and restrictions on assembly, these are draconian attacks on Virginians' rights to speech and protest. And additionally, our communities are part of our university communities. That includes our members that are not students. And I'll rest my time there.
Our next speaker is Yale Levin from, I don't have organization.
Good afternoon. My name is Yael Levine, and I'm a Jewish American and Israeli mother of 2 high school boys. My eldest son is a senior in high school, and he was looking forward to applying to several colleges in Virginia. I am from a Holocaust family, and my entire immediate family is in Israel. I know people who were killed on October 7th, and I know people who were taken hostage on October 7th. I know some who are still being held hostage by Hamas, a United States designated terror organization. My son likely has the grades to go to any school he wants, but after watching in horror the campus riots all over the Commonwealth and the country, we feel that he will not be safe in any college campus in Virginia or the country. The fact that I'm even standing here in the year 2024 and uttering these words should be alarming enough to every single one of you. Are Muslim parents afraid to send their children to college in America? I don't believe that they are, but Jewish parents are. In fact, I asked several friends of mine with students at Virginia Tech, UVA, and other colleges in Virginia to have their children sign up to speak today or have them speak themselves. The answer was a resounding no. And the reason was, we don't want to be outed as Jews. We're getting by just fine without being identified as Jews. Are you okay with that? I am not. As it stands now, we don't have a plan for my son when he graduates high school in May 2025. Maybe I'll send him to Israel, and when my youngest son graduates in 3 years, my husband, myself, and him will join my older son. What I do know is that we cannot send him to college in Virginia or America because he will not be safe. I am a free speech absolutist, but free speech does not mean the right to harass and intimidate someone because they're Jewish or Zionist. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jude Namus from VCU.
Hello, my name is Jude Namus. I'm a current third-year student at VCU speaking on my experiences on April 29th. On April 29th of this year, I joined many of my fellow students in an encampment that took place outside of VCU's Cable Library in order to show our support for the people of Palestine. In the beginning, the day was filled with peaceful chants, heartfelt speeches, and an excitement in the air that we were standing up for what's right. But after a couple of hours, bits of unease began to spread through the encampment. Murmurs of cops coming to shut it down were going around, and we began to practice how to use wooden pallets to protect ourselves. I remember thinking that this was overkill, and that there's no way VCU would sick cops on peaceful student protesters. But as pictures of approaching buses filled with cops began going around, I quickly realized I was wrong. I braced myself at the front of the line as tens of state and university police poured out of buses in full riot gear and with riot shields. They stood there for a little bit, preparing and talking amongst themselves before suddenly engaging. The cops charged at us, battering the line with their shields and spraying pepper spray all across the crowd, trying to grab anyone they could get their hands on to arrest. I found myself trying to step in front of a larger cop beating down a small defenseless female student with his shield, and felt the front of my collar pull me forward toward the ground as another body seemed to jump on my back and slap cuffs on my wrists. Me, along with 12 other arrestees, were taken to the jail to be processed for the night, skin and eyes burning, and weren't released until 5 a.m. the next morning. After a harrowing night like that, I was filled with a myriad of emotions, but found myself returning to anger. Angry that VCU wouldn't listen to those it claims to support. Angry that the money that I'm paying in tuition was used to beat and arrest me and my fellow students. And angry that VCU placed more value on the Israeli genocide of the Palestinian people rather than the thoughts and voices of its own students. Even now, VCU continues to disregard the feelings of its students, be it by banning chalk on the sidewalks, limiting gathering sizes, or any number of other policies. VCU has made it clear that they have no intention of listening to those who fight for the oppressed. This suppression of free speech and lack of protection for protesters fighting against a despicable genocide both clearly demonstrate that VCU's loyalties lie with the wrong party. Thank you.
Thank you to our in-person speakers today. That concludes our folks who are here in the room to speak, and we'll transition now to those who signed up to speak online. And I will let our staff call the names in the order that they were submitted.
Mr. Novick, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Good afternoon. My name is Rabbi Daniel Novick, and I'm the Executive Director of George Mason University, Hillel. As the head of an organization that works with the over 1,000 Jewish students at George Mason, I'm acutely aware of the impact the anti-Israel demonstrations have had on our Jewish students. I am here representing these students and ensuring their voices are heard, as this committee gathers information about the perspectives of those involved and impacted. There are two key points I want to highlight today. The first, it is clear to me from my work with Jewish students that the anti-Israel demonstrations on campus last year did without a doubt cause various levels of harassment and intimidation. At George Mason during the almost weekly protests, Jewish students would often reroute themselves to not be subjected to calls for the annihilation of their people or calls for an increase in violence as a form of resistance. Jewish students walked in fear of not knowing the identities of who on campus was calling for such violent actions. We're grateful for the partnership with the George Mason administration and their willingness to understand the impact of these actions and words on the Jewish population, and for working with us to best protect the safety and well-being of our Jewish students. The second, our Jewish students often hear that phrases used during these demonstrations, like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," or "long live the Intifada," are not anti-Semitic and not intended to be anti-Semitic. The fact of the matter is, for a large majority of my Jewish students, they interpret and hear these phrases as anti-Semitic and as a direct attack on their identity and personhood, and certainly not as peaceful rhetoric. When else do we tell a marginalized group that how they hear an attack on their identity group is wrong? No matter how one intends to say something, how it is heard should be prioritized in any fair and objective analysis. And perhaps that is enough reason for our universities, Commonwealth officials, and law enforcement agencies to consider time, place, and manner restrictions on groups' First Amendment rights. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with this committee on behalf of my Jewish students at George Mason University.
Meredith Weissel, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
We good? Great, thank you. Thank you, senators, for being here today. Meredith Weisel with the Anti-Defamation League. You have pretty extensive written testimony that I've submitted, so I don't want to go through all of that. But what I do want to highlight is that ADL is a leading anti-hate organization, and we have been actively involved and engaged with Jewish communities on campus, including students, faculty, and partner institutions. And the reality is, since October 7th, campus life across U.S. colleges and universities has been substantially altered. Jewish students, faculty, and staff in particular have faced a surge of anti-Semitic incidents. We have seen incidents of harassment of Jewish members of campus communities, vandalism of Jewish institutions, and in some cases, it has led to assault. ADL released a recent report that highlights, which includes Virginia, and there are many of these protest activities, so rallies, demonstrations, encampments that actually were not in fact peaceful and instead included incidents of vandalism, property destruction, harassment of Jewish students. I want to be really clear. ADL fully and firmly believes our country's colleges and universities serve as laboratories for the exchange of differing viewpoints. First Amendment. Hateful speech is protected speech. We are aware of that, but it is also required of school administrators and campus stakeholders. They have a responsibility to use their own expressive rights to challenge and confront bias. And there is a Title VI obligation, which has not been discussed at all today, which means that The harassment can create a hostile environment, and it is really important that schools have that obligation to respond under Title VI. Reality is several Jewish students were asked to come speak today, and they were afraid. They are not here because they were afraid to talk about their stories. Unfortunately, Jewish life has dramatically altered what is like on campus right now, and the escalation tactics we are continuing to see have been increasingly normalized, mainstreaming narratives of terror groups like Hamas, and that is directly targeting Jewish communities. Thank you.
Eli Weinger, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and fellow senators. My name is Eli Weinger. I'm a third-year student at the University of Virginia, and I've testified before many of you before, but today I'm here representing myself, and I would like to tell you my story. If any of you would like to follow up with me, I've provided my email in my written testimony. I grew up in Rockland County, New York, and attended Jewish day school from the age of 4 to 14. I went to synagogue with my mother almost every Shabbat. From the time I was little, I was taught the horrors of the Holocaust and consistently faced with the question I believe we all must ask ourselves when faced with such instances of horror. How was this monstrosity allowed to occur, and how can we assure nothing of the like ever happens again? When I was 7 or 8, I first read Martin Niemöller's famous poem in my history class. The poem read in part, quote, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak up because I was not a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak up for me." I was taught and believe strongly to this day that it is all of our responsibility to speak up against injustice, and that is what students were attempting to do when state police were called to UVA by President Jim Ryan on May 4th of 2024. I watched in horror as 2 officers pinned a girl a third their size to the ground, while a third tore off her goggles to pepper spray her inches from her eyes. I watched as my friends bled from their eyes, as we pleaded with ambulance workers who told us the administration had specifically prohibited medical staff from providing treatment to protesters. The only time I have felt unsafe as a Jewish student at the University of Virginia is when President Ryan used my identity and my culture as a cudgel with which to violently oppress constitutionally protected speech. Since then, the administration has continued to repress free speech. Thank you.
Joel Need, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Joel Need, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Need. I'm an attorney who's been practicing law for almost 30 years. I also authored an article in the August 2024 edition of the Virginia State Bar magazine entitled, "Is Virginia's Mask Law Constitutional?" I'll summarize it for you. It is. The mask rules adopted by universities are a watered-down version of the Virginia law that makes it a felony to wear masks in public with the intent to hide your identity. The law was upheld by Virginia state courts in 1991 and Virginia federal courts in 1992. The law has been enforced as recently as 2017 in the city of Richmond. Tragically, this issue has become politicized, even though mask bans are a liberal cause. The Democratic New York governor and the Democratic New York City mayor called for a mask ban in July. The Democratic Philadelphia City Council enacted a mask ban in December. In August, the California university system adopted a mask ban. I don't believe in assigning political bias to judges, but let's go there. The highest court in this country to discuss mask bans was the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals. It was a unanimous decision by 3 judges, one of which was appointed by President Carter, and the other was Justice Sotomayor, who subsequently was appointed to the Supreme Court by President Obama. That court said, and I quote, "The Supreme Court has never held that the right to engage in anonymous speech entails a right to conceal one's appearance. If you argue for anonymity, congratulations, you're making the same argument as the American Knights of the Ku Klux Klan." Do we pick and choose who to enforce the mask ban against depending on the message of the mask wearer? Unbelievably, we do. No mask-related arrests were made on college campuses last year. No student groups were suspended for encouraging their members to commit a felony. That bias is what will make this law unenforceable against masked white supremacists in the future. Imagine hooded Klansmen walking through the college campuses saying that Virginia cannot arrest them for wearing masks because Virginia is engaging in viewpoint discrimination. Does anyone in this room want to see that? Of course not. So insist that colleges enforce the law as written. Thank you.
Gabriel Stein, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Stein, and Chairwoman and fellow senators, thank you for having me today. I am also a student at the College of William & Mary, and I am also a board member on our Hillel, which is representative of over 400 Jewish students. Sadly, after the events of October 7th, our campus environment has repeatedly been made unsafe due to the actions of Students for Justice in Palestine and their fellow members. Their actions result in anti-Semitism taking hold on our campus and making Jewish students feel unsafe and less of a priority than the rest of the student body. For example, when SJP and its member base led a walkout last week, Jewish students were unable to access certain parts of campus due to intimidation and harassment led by our SJP chapter, which is, from my understanding, in violation of Title VI and requires enforcement. This, however, sadly, is just one example of anti-Semitism on our campus, and it has not been adequately addressed in regard to assuring students' safety. On a personal note, and as a visible and active Jewish student on our campus, I expect not to be treated as a second-class student. Free speech is an important protection, yet it cannot come and is not prevalent when hate and violent speech also takes hold on our campus. Naturally, this problem is only exacerbated when members of SGP and associates wear masks for the purpose of concealing their identity, and not of any illness, as myself and other Jewish students have interrogated and found answers for, in order to spew anti-Semitic slogans and wish for the extermination of Jews in Israel in general. Thus, it is our hope, as a representative of the college, the Jewish community, and all of William & Mary, that our students are not threatened and treated as we should be, and that we are not a second-class citizen at our universities. Free speech is an essential and as American and an individual right, yet it is even more essential to ensure our students, like myself, have their safety ensured and do not have to be spit on, screamed at, and excluded from parts of our campus. Thank you. Yachad Nenetzah.
Kira Schneiderman, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Kira Schneiderman, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Kira Schneiderman, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Jack Leff, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Thank you, Senator Hashmi. My name is Dr. Jack Leff. I completed my PhD at Virginia Tech, and I'm currently an adjunct at the university. I'm also Jewish and one of the 82 arrestees at the Virginia Tech encampment, held in a painful restraint position for well over 7 hours. As an educator, I was inspired to see so many of my brave students and colleagues stand up for what's right, so I felt it was my professional and personal obligation to sit with them. It is frustrating to hear vague and unserious concerns about anti-Semitism being raised by university administrators and Zionist activists who were not present at the encampments, while at the same time, nobody has mentioned the experiences of Jewish people like myself who were arrested by our universities. As someone who was actually at one of these encampments, there was no anti-Semitism or incitement to violence, only inclusion in a community towards Jewish people. In fact, when I was arrested, I was locking arms with 2 other Jewish students, an undergrad and a graduate student. Looking around me during the arrest, I realized that I was, in fact, surrounded by Jewish colleagues willing to risk arrest and violence to support our Palestinian friends and colleagues. When I was held in jail, it was a team of Jewish faculty who worked to get us out as quickly as possible. Yet despite the large Jewish presence at these protests, our local chapter of Hillel invited the Attorney General to campus to celebrate the mass arrests of Jewish students. Does that sound like taking anti-Semitism seriously to you, or protecting students from it? Cheering the mass arrests of Jewish students and activists? For me, anti-Semitism is nothing new. I was the target of the largest anti-Semitic attack in Virginia Tech's history, and these same groups now cheering the arrests of Jewish and Palestinian activists are also the ones who sent me anti-Semitic slurs and images of children who died in the Holocaust to threaten and intimidate me. So when groups claim universities have an anti-Semitism problem, I am inclined to agree. However, the anti-Semitism is not coming from campus protests. It is coming from the university administrators and pro-Zionist groups who lie about protester violence and privilege political point scoring above the safety of flesh and blood Jewish people. My letter is attached in my written testimony. I encourage you to read it. Thank you for your time.
Shahad Senuri, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Ms. Senuri, please unmute your mic.
Able to hear?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. My name is Shahad Sanuri. I just graduated from Virginia Tech, and I'm a first-year master's student at Virginia Tech. Please read my full testimony online. Throughout the year, there was an attempt to release a statement on higher education in Palestine through the 5 governing Senate bodies at Virginia Tech, which was illegally blocked by presidents of the Senates, and those actions were supported and enforced by the administration at Virginia Tech. FOIA and the Code of Virginia law on public meetings were completely violated and must be investigated. Palestinians and their allies in the movement, no matter their ethnic or religious background, experienced discrimination and anti-Palestinian racism. With the intensity of discrimination and pushback from the university, students, faculty, staff, and community members at Virginia Tech and in Blacksburg, Virginia joined together and formed an encampment at the Graduate Life Center lawn. The students complied with the rules of no tents and other rules as per the University Policy 5000, and we were told by VTPD that we are permitted to remain on the lawn for as long as we need to. 2 days later, VTPD abruptly said that the administration is forcing us to leave based on a policy violation. Peaceful protesters sitting on a lawn with their colleagues faced a trespassing charge, a lawn we paid tuition for. The unlawful arrests are an attack on students practicing freedom of speech, faculty encouraging academic freedom, and community members supporting their allies. Virginia Tech's administration silently changed the policy over the summer to justify their unlawful arrests after the fact. The president of the university, Tim Sands, fully acknowledged at a meeting that the new policy restricts his students and does not plan on providing students that freedom of expression and completely violates their First Amendment right. It is clear that the university administration is restricting its students, and the anti-Palestinian racism originates from them before the students or other members of the community. Jewish and Palestinian students are allies in this movement. It is the administration that is the enemy. Palestinians and allies in this movement will all reunite in a free Palestine. Thank you.
Before we continue, Senator Durant, did you wish to make a comment? Thank you. And just to our staff, I'll say I have 2 names that I think may have been skipped over: Danielle Warchowski and Sam Amos. I'm not sure if they're not in the room. Okay, thank you.
Leanne Masri, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Hello, my name is Leanne Masri, and I'm a 3rd-year student at Virginia Tech. Over the last 11 months, we have witnessed Palestinian students and our allies being denied their right to free speech, as institutions like Virginia Tech deliberately marginalize and silence our voices. This suppression contradicts the values of diversity and inclusion universities nationwide claim to uphold. Following the events of October 7th, Virginia Tech lit Burrs Halls in Israeli colors and held a moment of silence for Israeli students during a football game. While these actions expressed support for one group, they completely ignored the Palestinians, who have been facing oppression for their entire lifetime. When we met with our president, Tim Sands, a month later to request similar recognition or even any at all, he admitted regret for his initial actions and expressed concern that, quote, donors would not be happy, end quote. The university acknowledged Palestinian voices. The university has systemically refused to recognize Palestinian voices even in light of the blockades in various levels of Senate. And our peaceful protest was framed as violent when 82 individuals were arrested for exercising their right to free speech. We were told we were allowed to be on the lawn until the day of the arrest. We wanted the constructive dialogue that you also prioritize Virginia Tech, but you are the ones who refused. Tim Sands refused to talk to us, later admitting he was afraid to face us students. This is a man charged with representing students of all backgrounds, supposed to be addressing their concerns, yet his fear led him to refuse to meet with students, instead ordering their arrests. Since the arrests, our university, along with many other nationwide, have changed their policy to make it systemically harder for students to exercise their right to free speech. Tim Sands even acknowledged this in a faculty meeting, stating that it may be difficult, nearly impossible to obtain insurance that complies with these regulations. We refuse to accept this injustice. Thank you.
There is someone in there.
Amira Ahmed, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Zoe Young, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Hello, Chairwoman and other Senate members. My name is Zoe Young. I am a senior at the University of Mary Washington. On April 26th, a Friday in April, I joined the UMW Solidarity Encampment in hopes of pushing our university to take a stand against genocide, or at the very least disclose their divestments to student protesters who were hoping to get an understanding of what stake our college tuition might have in matters that we do not morally approve of. Rather than having my voice and the voices of dozens of fellow students heard, we were met first with intimidation, with police showing up and standing over us that Friday after we were told to take our tents down at 8 p.m. and did so at 8 on the dot, and then legal action. After seeing tents put up for graduation the following day, we presumed we were in the clear to put our own back up and did so midday. Shortly after, administration created a brand new policy, which they gave exclusively to student protesters and had not yet put in the student handbook, and used it to arrest 9 students, of which I was one, and 3 community members who were there to show support for our movement and to help students who were there day and night, maintaining the encampment and standing up for what was right. I spent all summer tied up in a legal case for trespassing on an open campus at a university which I paid to attend, on a lawn which we had booked for that day. The policy they used to arrest us, alongside several others which prohibit chalking on most of campus and require chalkers to sign their names, creating flyers that do not promote a singular event, and place restrictions on masking that, as someone who still masks for health reasons every week or so, I have not seen enforced on singular people masking day to day. I find it clear that UMW is trying to restrict its students' ability to protest, which is a First Amendment right clearly outlined in the Constitution, and critique it as an institution. I care about this school and the people who go here. I just want to see that care returned to students who are politically engaged, something which UMW claims to support in its own Aspire values, its very mission statement, with the E in Aspire standing for engagement. That's all we're trying to do, and the responsibility we're trying.
Amira Ahmed, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Amira Ahmed, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on. Sasha Radulov, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on.
Hi, my name is Alexander Radulov, and I'm a senior at the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, VA. On April 26th, a group of students and community members, including myself, set out to partake in a form of peaceful protest on the UMW campus. This protest was not only fully within the law, but was designed to violate no school policy. In fact, we had undergone discussion with UMW faculty to ensure that we would not be met with trouble in our days-long protest, as trouble was something a lot of us could not afford. However, within 12 hours of the start of our protest, state troopers were spotted with zip ties the opposite side of the building from our protest. One member of admin has cited safety concerns, and it was not made clear whether these concerns were for or of us, no matter how many clarifying questions were asked. In any case, the presence of state troopers was far greater a safety concern than our camping tents, lawn chairs, anti-genocide symbolism, and food. We complied as best we could with the nonsensical demands from admin while continuing our protest. Nonetheless, the following day, 12 of us, including myself and 8 other students, 3 community members, were arrested by campus police and state troopers for trespassing on a public campus, our public campus, fewer than 36 hours after we had begun a legal event that had fallen within school guidelines. The absence of freedom of speech and the right of protest is undemocratic. The events of late April to early May across Virginia, the arrests of student protesters, the use of tear gas and police brutality against students in Richmond and Charlottesville are about as obvious an example as could get of the absence of freedom of speech and right to protest. So to anyone with any power, do you or do you not support our most basic democratic rights?
Thank you to all the speakers who presented online. We have a few folks that had signed up this morning, but we were already at capacity, and so I encourage those individuals who wanted to share testimony to provide written testimony. We continue to receive written testimony all throughout today, and we will be disseminating that to our colleagues here on the committee. And having heard individual presentations now, are there any questions that our committee members would raise for us to explore and to think about as we move towards some policy discussions and ideas in the next few weeks? Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It would be helpful, I think, if we could get some kind of compendium of not just the legally required policies that our universities must have regarding the exercise of freedom of speech, but also what their individual school-oriented policies and procedures are, and where they're advertised, where they're promoted, and any conversations that the universities have had with their respective student groups. I would hope that the universities are actually engaging with the students who are protesting or have a view, and I'd like to know if that is actually happening. And then it might give us a nice overview of how conversations are going on at our universities.
Thank you. Excellent point. Just to add to what you have shared, I would encourage our colleges and university partners to think about some degree of uniform policies that are spread out across Virginia, especially as we have students that transfer from one institution to another. If we have consistency in our approaches to student activism and faculty freedom of speech and academic rights, that consistency would help us in Virginia to establish some uniformity in our approaches. Senator Craig, you're on the board.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the speakers today. You know, if you just tuned into this meeting maybe halfway in, We didn't get to hear your speech in the beginning that said, we wouldn't be asking questions, but most of the people that spoke today spoke about our law enforcement, basically police brutality. And I see we have Secretary of Public Safety Cole here. I mean, honestly, I feel like if he's here in the audience and we have a few minutes, we should be able to hear from Secretary Cole on those issues, because Virginia State Police was mentioned almost in every person's statement about police brutality. And I think it would only be fair that our own state police at least have a voice.
Thank you, Senator Craig. We will hear from the Secretary, but first let me take additional committee comments. Senator Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the body, I'm not really sure that we should be doing anything legislatively over college policies and how they develop these policies for a variety of reasons. One is that case law is ever evolving. Two is that our universities are wildly different. Three is that if we're too overly prescriptive, times change and the law doesn't keep up with it. And I worry about those things. I mean, that's not to say do nothing. That's just to say that I have those three worries about us trying to legislate on this issue. I also think today has been a good example of how hard it is to think through this and untangle this knot. I think the colleges have two conflicting responsibilities that are both incredibly important. One is to uphold free speech, and the other is also to uphold anti-discrimination and to make sure that all kids are able to have a voice and to make sure that all kids are safe. And that's a really hard job. And I do not envy them that universally, not just to this event, but in perpetuity, whether it's whatever the event is or whatever the issue is. I think maybe something that would be worth looking through is, time, place, and manner restrictions are appropriate. We have to have time, place, and manner. I mean, speaking as a K-12 teacher, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to teach. When we look at a lot of the conversation today was around encampments. Encampments are not a free speech right. Having said that, we probably need to look at what the ramp up is when we think about how we punish people for doing it and what the processes are for how that works. Because there are safety issues with kids camping out 24/7 for a week or whatever it is. It's different all over the country and all over the state. And that is a legitimate issue that colleges have to regulate and respond to. Having said that, they don't have to go to 0 to 60. I'm not saying every college did go to 0 to 60. I'm not even saying that happened most of the time. I'm just saying that might be some fruitful conversation and dialogue. The last thing I'll say is, and once again, I think this meeting is an example of this, and I don't mean it in a negative way. I just mean it in an analytical way. It's really easy for language and accusations to start getting really loose and really careless. And that's what makes this really hard for people to assume best intent, to people to respect everything that people is saying. I think we have a responsibility, whether we're a citizen, a student, a legislator, whoever, to be careful with our language and to be careful with what we say. But you can't legislate that. You can't legislate that. And then the final thing I'll say is, I think the one takeaway I have, and I don't blame anybody for this, because this is just an incredibly hard thing to do in the best of times. I think at the end of the day, this comes down to clear boundaries, clear rules, clarity and objective standards that are followed no matter what. I might like some of those rules. I might not like some of those rules. They're the rules. And I don't know how we're going to get to them, but it seems to me like one of the biggest problems we had in the spring was a lack of clarity. And I mean that all the way around. And so I don't know that what I just said added anything, because once again, I'll end where I started. I'm not sure we should have a legislative policy on this. But that's kind of what I took from this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Valkenburg. And I'll just add briefly to your comments. When we're talking about a college community and college campuses, we have to remind ourselves that it includes faculty, it includes staff. We heard today from a considerable number of faculty and staff, as well as administrators. And so it is a microcosm of the world, and we're asking our colleges and universities to absorb the issues, the high-pressured issues of the outside world within their internal spaces, and bring some degree of order to the chaos that is in the outside world. And it is a tall order, and I know that our colleges, our institutions are grappling with very complex issues. For me today, one of the critical purposes was to listen and learn. And I hope my committee members join me in that effort to really listen intentionally to all sides, not just to the sides that they favor, but to all sides, because there are very sensitive issues. But at the end of the day, we're all part of this community. And I think we're trying to navigate a system to bring degrees of justice and peace and reconciliation on some very, very complicated issues. With that and saying, we have one more senator, Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the time that was spent today, and I appreciate every single person who was brave enough to come and speak to us today. You have shared your hearts with us. You have shared experiences that I don't think anybody wanted to go through. And I think that it exemplifies that we're in a really painful time in our history right now. And we don't have a roadmap of how we navigate these really difficult interpersonal feelings when they are so deeply held. And people have family members who have been harmed. They have loved ones that they care about. I have struggled through the past couple of years around a lot of this as well. And I think that talking about it breeds a way to find some sort of a resolution on how we see one another, how we listen to one another, how we have compassion for someone who is completely different than the other. And when our colleges and universities, and I really was pleased with what I heard from, especially from George Mason, where it was very clear the intentionality that the president had in reaching out to the students, to hear them, to make sure that he cared about them, to make certain that the students were being heard. I think we need more of that. I think we need to sit down when we disagree and look at each other in the eye and try to listen, as you have tried to do today, and not turn it into a political gotcha, which I think some people were hoping this would be, but really an honest and heartfelt opportunity to try to understand the pain and the grief and the real torture that some people are going through. And that goes for the folks today, that goes for what's going on in our country, which is we have an election going on right now, but we're all in this together. And at the end of the day, we're all gonna still be here living together. And so I applaud the effort for us to try to understand one another a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. We have Senator Peake, and then we'll hear from the secretary who's been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been quite an afternoon and interesting and informative. We heard from, I think today, more one side of the issue, the student side, which was very informative. And I'm very sympathetic to students and their passion and their right to protest and their right to speak out at our colleges, at our universities, at our government buildings, anywhere in society. But there are laws that have to be followed. There are rules that have to be followed. We have to support our law enforcement, and free speech is not absolute. We all know that. We've all heard the talk, and we know what the law is, and you cannot say certain things. You can say certain things. You have the right to assemble, but not every place do you have the right to assemble, and sometimes you have to get permits, and you have to follow regulations, and you have to follow time periods and those certain things, and you have to sometimes organize law enforcement or security and those things, and the state, our communities have an interest in making sure that any event will be safe and peaceful for the citizens. And we heard from the citizens, or from the students today a lot. And I know a lot of them said all we're doing were peaceful chants. If that peaceful chant is from the river to the sea, then that does not necessarily seem peaceful to a certain segment of the population and could be deemed language that might incite violence, which is not always protected. We did not hear from police today, and I know the students said they were peaceful, but were they blocking sidewalks? Were they blocking streets? Were they blocking the entrance to academic buildings to prevent students from getting into their classrooms where they have paid money to take classes? And I know maybe that did not happen. I see that with VCU, but I think it did happen at various places. And I think we all saw on television many places where it did happen, where students were assaulted and blocked from going into their own institutions to take their classes. And I agree with my fellow senator down there, Senator Schuyler Van Valkenburg, who talked about the freedom to speech and the freedom to assemble does not guarantee you the freedom to camp out overnight on university property or city property or state property. And I think back to Seattle and the George Floyd protest, and you had what was called CHAZ, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHOP, Capitol Hill Organized Protest Zone, where they took over downtown Seattle, the federal building, blocked off several blocks of downtown Seattle, and held it for a month, preventing small businesses from opening and earning a living and blocking the federal courthouses. So we can't just let students pop up tents on public property and prevent people from going there. We heard the student side today, and they did an excellent job presenting their side. I look forward to hearing from Secretary Cole, but I think we also need to hear more from the university police and the other side about things that were said, access to buildings, access to streets, and then all of those things. So I look forward to hearing the whole story down the road.
Thank you, Senator Peake, and we will certainly raise those questions for our institutions to address, and we are certainly able to hold another meeting focused on campus security, public safety. Secretary, please make your comments as you wish.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the time yesterday. I truly appreciated the conversation. And just following up on a few key points, this is all about public safety for me. We need to remember that orders were given to disassemble. Lawful orders were given by university officials and by campus police, and people didn't leave. The campus police and university officials called and asked for VSP's assistance, which is normal. It happens every day. It happens for commencements. It happens for graduations. It happens for football games. This time it happened for what the police needed help with on campus. The other thing is there's a much larger picture here, and we briefly talked about it yesterday. And I'm concerned about some of the money that's coming in and going out from SJP, some of the money that's coming in and going out from AMP, and they are very challenging concerns for law enforcement. I would love to discuss them more in a private session because I think they're important for us to understand and put into context. And I'd also like to talk about, the involvement of these campus law enforcement officials that were also assaulted. They were hit with bear spray. They were hit with hammers. They were hit with rocks when they were doing their job. So I think it's important we keep it all into context that, to your point, very critical and difficult conversation to have. And there's also, the component of where is this money, dark money going? This dark money that comes in, where is it going to? Well, we've seen in open source reporting that some of this, and this is open source, you can find this on the internet, some of this funding is going to Hamas. Some of this funding is going to Hezbollah. And it's critically important. I know that's difficult for people to understand.
I'm going to ask our audience to refrain from any kind of audible sounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know that's difficult to understand, but that's the way it currently is. So I look forward to working with you. I look forward to having a closed-door discussion. I look forward to bringing some of this information together. But it's stuff that we need to be laser focused on. Because this has the ability, with this amount of money we're talking about, this dark money that's coming in, to really sway public opinion, student opinion. Because there are false narratives out there. So thank you, Madam Chair. I look forward to continuing the discussion. I'm always available for the public safety issues. And I look forward to being at your service.
Thank you, Secretary. As we discussed yesterday, some of what you were sharing was highly sensitive information, and so absolutely that is something that we should address with the full General Assembly, with our leadership in both in the Senate and in the House to discuss that further. Thank you. Senator Durant, did you want to make a comment?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. If I may, I just wanted to ask Secretary Cole if you could clarify a little bit about that connection with Students for Justice in Palestine, and a little bit of the sourcing of the funding that you're talking about, if that's with Americans for Muslims for Palestine, how that is exactly connected to protests in Virginia.
Before you answer that question, Secretary, as you had shared with me, that is highly classified information, and Virginia General Assembly members are not even yet privileged, and you're working to gain privilege for us to be able to access some of the information that you have access to. So I would ask you, as I'm sure you will, to limit your response to what you can share, because as you shared with me, it's highly sensitive and classified information.
We can get the clearances so we can have this discussion, because as I pointed out yesterday, myself and the governor have access to this type of information because I'm the Homeland Security Advisor to the governor. I would like to find a way to have this conversation with you. And I have talked to folks about this previously, recently with the similar drone occurrences in the Tidewater area. These are just the issues that we need to keep you informed of, keep you abreast of, because there's serious public safety issues. The document I referred to that's on open source, I'd be happy to share with the chairwoman to pass out
Thank
at a
you.
later
Yes,
date.
if you can share that, we will disseminate it to the committee members and ensure that committee members have that. And I know you're working on getting federal clearance and authorization so that we who are in the Virginia General Assembly can have much more important conversations with you. And we look forward to doing
Yes, ma'am.
that.
Thank you.
You, Secretary.
Madam Chair, just a follow-up question on that.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Cole, you had also talked about there's a relationship with law enforcement. I think my colleague next to me understands that. We talked about a little bit beforehand about the response that's made that comes as a result from the, I don't know if it's a memorandum of understanding from campus police when you respond. You said it's not just mutual aid agreement. Thank you. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that, and I think it's important that we hear about this in the committee about when, how that response happens. What's the standard operating procedure for it?
Yeah, I would be happy to share the policy with you, not only of each individual agency has an agreement with the state police, and that's the procedure that they follow. So I'd be happy to share that with you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Secretary. Seeing no other members on the board, I don't believe we have any further questions and comments. I just want to thank, again, all of our community members who have been here, who have shared oral testimony, everyone who shared written testimony, and if there's further testimony anyone wishes to provide, please feel free to email the office and we will distribute it to all committee members. Thank you. With that, the committee shall rise.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.